Tipp today in association with Slattery's of Pecan, your main Peugeot dealer for over 50 years in the Premier County. Slattery'sGarage.ie.
Good morning. Welcome along to Tipp Today. 1800 938 007. That's our free phone number. Won't cost you if you'd like to make a call to us. And Leanne is producing today. Coming up on the show, we'll be hearing from Minister Patrick O'Donovan a little later on in the hour. And Deputy Michael Murphy will speak to us shortly. We'll be joined by Defence Analyst Declan Power. Councillor Liam Brown will share his perspective on the protests. Tom Bawn will help us find some peace in nature in these very difficult times indeed. After 11, we'll be hearing from Richard Kennedy of the Garda Representative Association, and Dan Harty of Sinn Féin will respond to the protests as well. So all of that and much, much more on the way. You can text and WhatsApp 083 311 3311. You can email tiptoday@tippfm.com. Now this week, Larry O'Keefe's Furniture in Clonmel and Mitchelstown, they've given us a €250 voucher to give away to a lucky listener this week in celebration of their massive sale that is now on, and you have the chance to grab huge reductions, I'm assured, right across the departments, living room, bedroom, dining and more, with unbeatable offers and savings galore. It's the perfect time to transform your home. So if you want to be in with a chance to become a finalist today, and we're giving that away, by the way, on Friday. If you want to be a finalist, all you have to do is get texting or WhatsApping right now Larry O'Keefe. If you just text Larry O'Keefe to 083 311 3311 along with your details, we will pop you in the draw. Now, what a week it was last week. What a weekend it was indeed. The government has signed off on more than €500 million in measures to support those struggling with rising energy costs. It follows almost a week of protests and blockades which disrupted fuel supplies around the country, crippled road networks and indeed brought Dublin city centre to a standstill. Well, Fine Gael Deputy for Tipperary Michael Murphy is chair of the Oireachtas Committee for Transport, and he joins me now from our Clonmel studio. Good morning to you, Michael.
Good morning, Fran.
And thanks very much indeed for coming on with us today. Sinn Féin is to table that motion of no confidence in the government over its handling of the fuel protest. The government has the numbers to counter this, but most would agree, Michael, the handling of this crisis, an absolute disaster.
Yeah, Fran, look, as you said in your opening remarks, it's been a really, really difficult week for so many sectors of society, for families, for workers, farmers, farm contractors, hauliers, and can I also say for government public representatives as well. There's a lot of real frustration out there, and I fully recognise that. I do want to say at the outset as well, Fran, you know, people have a right to have their voices heard. I do want to acknowledge the protests in Tipperary, particularly at Cahir and Cashel, protests that appear to be, you know, well organised and indeed dignified, and I want to recognise that, and I want to put that on the record. You know, what my focus on, Fran, is making sure that engagement that I'm having at the national level and have been having over the last week, you know, leads to solutions, practical solutions that can be implemented immediately. I think people now at this stage, they want clarity, they want focus, and you know, that's where my I suppose priority lays. I do just want to, at the outset as well, Fran, if you would allow me, just, you know, I do think we need to lower the temperature a small bit, and I would appeal to people. Look, there's been a lot of engagement with my office over the last 72 hours, and I'm available to engage, I'm available to meet, but I would just ask people in particular, in terms of any engagement with my staff, just to be respectful. They're doing their best, and yeah,
I'm sure they are, Michael, but you know, a lot of the rise in the temperature could be put down to how the government handled this, and it was a bit cack-handled.
Look, and I'm not denying that, Fran. I think there was, you know, if I'm to be perfectly honest, I think there's been fault on both sides. My priority has always been to listen, to engage constructively, and deliver solutions that make a real difference. You know, we're in the midst of an energy crisis. Ongoing developments in the Middle East are deeply, deeply concerning. Look, people in the context of their fuel bills, I would describe it as a perfect storm. And in that regard, look, I think last night's announcement is a positive step in the context of further reductions in excise duty, that those reductions have been extended until the 31st of July. I think in the context of petrol, it brings the total reduction to 27 cent a litre. In the context of diesel, 32 cent a litre. I think the decision to defer the next increase in carbon tax was the right decision. We have a really, really good package for hauliers. It's a cash payment, I think, for 1 to 5 vehicles. It's a monthly payment of €1,300. For 5 to 20 vehicles, it's a reduced payment of €700.
So the protests worked, Michael, to some degree. I mean, the government would not have moved on this. Is that not fair to say, without the people getting out on the streets?
Look, the government has been constantly committed, Fran, to keeping these measures under review. And, let me say, and, should things, and I suppose developments in the Middle East develop even further, the government is always prepared to intervene again. And I do want to highlight as well that there's ongoing discussions at European level as well, and I think we need a European-wide intervention as well. Look, are we reacting to protests? I don't think so, Fran. As I said, we made an intervention, I think, 3 weeks into the Middle Eastern war.
Most people viewed as paltry, to be honest, Michael,
Yeah, look, I don't think €250 million at the time. It was one of the most significant interventions at European level. Look, we have another €550 million worth of announcements last night, bringing a total to almost 800 million. But look, it's a really, really difficult situation. Tensions are very, very high. People are really, really struggling. And look, government will always try and do its best. And as I said, that's where my focus on, promoting solutions that can be implemented in a timely manner.
It's something politicians talk about all the time, lessons to be learned. I mean, surely there's lessons to be learned around some of the language used by your own party leader, for example, the Taoiseach, saying a sinister and a despicable attack on our economy and our society. He said under the laws of the land that these people will be dealt with without fear or favour. I mean, these were largely ordinary people brought to the point of their collar.
Yeah, look, as I said, Fran, look, and language is very important, and I recognise that, and I think some of the language used by government wasn't helpful to the situation, and particularly, calls for the Defence Forces to intervene. Look, I think we just
was that a mistake, Michael?
I think it was, and I think, but look, I also think we just need to move on. We all need to work together if we're, get back to that kind of spirit of that community spirit. This is a crisis. It's an unprecedented crisis. It's not a domestic failure. It's to do with an ongoing war in the Middle East, and it's not going to be easy over the next number of weeks and months for many sectors. And I just hope that the measures announced last night, extended until the end of June, will make some bit of a difference, particularly for hauliers. I just want to welcome the rebate scheme for farmers. I think 120,000 farmers will benefit. For farm contractors, I think 1,500 farm contractors will benefit. That's the rebate scheme of up to 20 cent a litre based on their usage for 2025. And as I said, I've already mentioned a package for hauliers as well. And I do welcome that school transport operators and local link operators are also included in another scheme that will be dealt with through the contract which they're working through.
And what about ordinary people? I mean, I spoke to Margaret last week, and it would bring a tear to a stone. She spoke to me. She was sitting in the cold as she was talking to me because she couldn't afford home heating oil. Nothing has been done about that. What about carers out there? I heard Richie Malloy speak about this over the weekend as well. There's still a lot of people out there, Michael, suffering and dealing with huge amount of difficulty.
Yeah, and look, I'm engaging with those people every week through my office, and I will continue to provide assistance where I can. Look, just to mention the first round of measures, Fran, the fuel allowance, €37 a week, worked up to €1,000 a year, extended by 4 weeks. And a fuel allowance that's significantly more than equivalent payments, be it in Northern Ireland, Spain, where similar payments are only a fifth of what they are
but
here.
It's still a couple of bags of coal.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to be here to say, look, I'm dealing with those. It's very, very difficult for them, Fran. Hopefully, we're heading into, in terms of, rising temperatures, that will make a difference as well. But of course it's very difficult for so many, as you said, carers, all of whom that I'm dealing with through my office, trying to assist them in terms of securing additional needs payments through the social welfare office. I have a number of appointments with social protection even today in that regard. But people are struggling. As I said, I've always been very connected to the ground, as are my colleagues, the Fine Gael councillors on Tipperary County Council as well, and we're there to assist. My office is open, and so many hardship cases. I acknowledge that,
It's interesting, Michael, that, with all of the disruptions of the last week, 56% of people told Ireland Thinks that they agree with the actions of the fuel protesters, while just 38% disagreed. Now, the 56%, they were people who were discommoded. They were people that, found it difficult to go about their daily lives because of the protests, but they still thought it was worthwhile. Is this a big lesson for the government? I
think it is, Fran. Perhaps it could be even a watershed moment for this government. Look, I've many friends that participated in the protests, particularly in Cashel, all of whom were in direct contact with me, all of whom I tried to engage with to the best of my ability. And as I said at the outset, well organised, dignified, and I want to thank them for the extent to which they facilitate the movement of emergency vehicles or people with key medical appointments. I want to put on record, though, Fran, I couldn't get my head around the and sorry, can I just also say that, the right to protest is a cornerstone of our democracy, but I couldn't get my head around the blockades at Whitegate Refinery in particular, and a number of other ports. Like, this protest is essentially about the price of fuel, and I just couldn't get my head around as to why, there were blockades that ultimately disrupted
desperation and frustration, Michael.
Look, perhaps, Fran, and look, lessons definitely to be learned. We had 2 parliamentary party meetings over the weekend. We're all heading up to Dublin today, a day early as well. Obviously, you mentioned the vote of no confidence. There'll be a lot of soul searching. We had a very, I would describe, heated meeting of the parliamentary party last night. I suspect we're going to have a significant debate around carbon tax. The future of the carbon tax. I certainly think it does definitely merit a review. And look, we have
a review in what way? Michael?
Look, I think a review, you see, carbon tax is currently calculated, if I'm correct, at approximately €70 per tonne of carbon emission. I can't tell you the exact, but it's somewhere around €70 a tonne. But the proposal is to increase it by up to €100 a tonne by 2030. And I think, look, we just need to have a debate around that. I see the merit of the carbon tax in the context of, reducing our dependency on fossil fuels, the retrofitting of homes, other social protection.
It's really only useful for people who have a few bob, though, to be honest with you, Michael. I'm not sure how useful it is for people who are struggling. Yeah,
and, and just to add to that as well, this government has made a decision. This was a point I made myself at the parliamentary party meeting last night, Fran. We've 2 rainy day funds, the Future Ireland Fund and the Infrastructure and Climate Fund, and by the end of this year we'll have 24 billion euros in both of those funds. And I've always said it's the right thing to do, to put away money, not to spend all the resources available to the Exchequer. But we're certainly in a rainy day at the moment, and is it time to reach into that pot of money and indeed additional measures? And I think if this war continues, I think energy credits for the forthcoming winter have to be on the table, and I'll be certainly advocating for that within
what about the coalition now at this point? I mean, it appears to me anyway there's certainly a rift between Defence and Justice. Minister McEntee strongly rebuking Jim O'Callaghan for the send in the army statement. Is there a rift there now as well?
Look, I don't think so, Fran, and that's speaking very honestly. Look, there'll always be differences of opinions, but I think there's good cohesion between the coalition partners. Yes, there is a vote of no confidence. Obviously, the government will reverse that and treat it as a vote of confidence. I fully expect the government to win that vote, and as I said, I'll continue to focus on, delivering, suggesting concrete supports, rather than, it'll take up a bit of time, but ultimately it's a meaningless motion. It will be, the motion of no confidence will be defeated. Look, we just need to move on. We've made one of the largest, if not now the largest intervention in the European Union. We did that because we know that this crisis is having a profound impact on businesses, on community-specific sectors in particular, Fran. But again, look, it's so difficult out there, and we just need to all work together and try and get through this.
One of the things we learned, I think, over the last week and a half or so is that we do follow international guidance big time. I mean, Micheál Martin came out and said that his guidance was coming from the ECB and the IMF, Michael. They develop frameworks for managing crises like this. Are we not thinking for ourselves here at all? Have we any autonomy at all now at this point?
Well, I think last night's intervention shows the extent of the autonomy we have, Fran. This was a significant package announced last night, 550 million euros, particularly designed to support the haulage and farm contracting sector, and others, a number of measures for fisheries as well. I think there was some suggestion that in terms of the additional reductions in excise, that we formally sought a derogation from the European Union, and I do think that we need to see something, some intervention at the European level, some further intervention at the European level. I know there's this toolkit being expected, but I think we need to see that this week, what measures we can introduce at the European level.
But this is the reason, at least is my understanding, as to why we can't move on home heating oil, for example, because of directives from Europe.
Correct, and we've discussed that directive previously, Fran, and that's why it's absolutely urgent. I think I know Commissioner McGrath is meeting with the Commission President, I think is it today or tomorrow, to discuss this, but I definitely think we need some additional support at the European level, and particularly changes to the directive that will give the government further scope, because I don't think this is over yet. I think latest developments in Iran are deeply concerning. I was very hopeful that we would have a peace deal, and still hopeful that we could have, but look, it's so fluid over there at the moment, and ongoing developments remain a real worry.
Can I finally ask you about the Gardaí and the role they played here? And I'm just wondering, that relationship between the Gardaí and the public, is that really badly damaged because of the last few days?
Yeah, look, nobody wants to, and I certainly don't want to see the scenes that we saw at Whitegate. I think it's important, though, just in the overall context, Fran, just to acknowledge that the other protests, other blockades around the country, at Féin, at Rosslare, at Galway Port, all ended peacefully. Look, An Garda Síochána faced a very difficult, a very unprecedented situation with critical infrastructure being obstructed. I don't know the sequence of events in Whitegate in terms of what warnings were given in advance, but look, I don't want to see pepper spray being used, individuals being dragged from vehicles. It was very, very unfortunate, and yes, look, An Garda Síochána have a very difficult, but I do welcome in other locations around the country, Fran, that all protest blockades ended in a peaceful manner.
All right, and just finally, I mean, you're chair of the Oireachtas Committee on Transport. What role do you have in this now, from your committee's point of view, Michael? We don't have much of a role from a committee perspective. Like the job of the committee is really to scrutinise legislation, accountability in the context of transport spend. If there is, obviously we're meeting. We've a special meeting. We don't normally meet until a Wednesday, Fran, but we have a special meeting convened for 6 o'clock tomorrow evening in private to see what we can do. But the approach I'll be taking was with working with
not just colleagues in government that are members of the committee, but colleagues in opposition that are members of the committee, to see where we can go from a committee perspective. But within the Fine Gael Parliamentary Party, within government, I'll continue to be a strong voice. As you said, Fran, it's been a very, very difficult week. Lessons learned on both sides. But it's really important that we come up with measures, solutions, financial interventions that make a difference. I think last night's intervention was, I think, a step in the right direction. But look, we need to keep it constant review. We need an additional EU support level as well. And again, can I just finish in the context of what I said earlier, Fran? A lot of engagement with my office over the last 72 hours. It's just to appeal to people, to absolutely engage with me, absolutely engage with the office, but just to be respectful to my staff, because there's a tone out there, and it's most people engage in a very respectful manner, Fran, but I'm appealing to those others just to lower the tone a small bit, particularly for my staff.
All right, thanks for your time this morning, Michael. Thank you. Good morning to you. As Deputy Michael Murphy speaking to us this morning from our Clonmel studio, 1800 938 007.
Tipp FM's Tip Today.
With Slattery's Garage, Puck On. Main Peugeot dealers in the Premier County. And now stocking the full range of the luxury French car brand DS Automobiles. Book your test drive today with Slattery's Garage, Puck On. See slatterysgarage.ie. Tip Today, in association with Slattery's of Puckon, your main Peugeot dealer for over 50 years in the Premier County. slatterysgarage.ie.
Glad to be joined now by Declan Power, former Irish Army soldier, defence analyst and author. Good morning to you, Declan.
Morning, Fran. How are you?
I'm well, and thank you so much for making time for us today. You've made the point in a piece I read from you, Declan, that as we head into hosting the EU presidency in a few short months, the protests have demonstrated how easy it could be to bring this country to a standstill.
Yes, and regardless of what one's opinions are about the protests or the driving forces, if you just look at the consequences of them in terms of two or more strategic assets in terms of the oil refiners, let's just take Féin and Whitegate, and you can throw in some other areas as well. How easy it was to blockade them, how easy it was to affect the running of essential services. And where this is of particular concern is that a lot of the anger, if you like, behind the protests was, I suppose it manifested itself online first, then led to physical meetings, then led to the physical protests. So one particular concern various specialists in the area of disinformation have been having in Europe, throughout the European Union, is the effects and the ease at which Russian bots, troll farms, have been used to sow disinformation in various countries, particularly coming up to important issues like elections. And it is expected during Ireland's hosting of the EU presidency that we will probably see a surge in contentious issues and disinformation on Irish in online media traffic. And what will the effect of that be? And we saw how stretched the state services were to contain this. So imagine maybe a lesser form of issue that brings people onto the streets, maybe not in the same numbers, but add in maybe a medium to low level cyber attack, and then maybe some sort of drone buzzing our presence at Dublin Airport. And the state would be very much stretched. I mean, it reinforces just how important it is that we have assistance on hand to us during this period. And one thing that I suppose can be said on a positive basis is, thankfully, we have had the sense now to come to some sort of an arrangement with both the French and the British in terms of supplying us with some essential services. And there are other European Union partners, particularly with regards to drone technology, that are stepping in as well. But even with all of those things, Fran, I still think this country will will face some severe testing.
Just from your experience, Declan, is there a plan in place? It was also higgledy-piggledy over the past week in terms of, should the army come in, should they not come in, who has jurisdiction over deciding when the army comes in, and that's, is it the Gardaí or is it the department, is it the minister? Is there a plan there?
Okay, if I could say something that might maybe reassure people, again, regardless of their political stance. One thing that has emerged in particular, I would say, during the protests, but it's not peculiar just to the fuel protests, it's been manifesting over the last few years, and that is a tendency to infer things that are just completely not accurate. But if people say them loudly and often enough, people treat them like they're accurate. So there was no, to be fair, and I would be one of the first to criticise some of, to borrow your term, higgledy-piggledy approaches to crisis planning that our state can be capable of. But with regards to the deployment of the Gardaí and the army, it's very straightforward, and it's very much a laid down thing. And there were people splitting hairs and trying to confuse issues. There were people publicising laws that are outdated since the 1920s as if they were fact. So, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, but it's an even more dangerous thing if your intention is to be mischievous or malign, to create confusion. The reality is that a senior Garda officer can call out military assistance within his or her region if they need be, by making the necessary call and filling out the C70 form. And the relevant government departments can do it. There are aspects called aid to the civil authority and aid to the civil power. And that was how the army was only ever going to be used. There was never going to be an issue of troops with fixed bayonets marching onto the streets to take over from the Gardaí. And that inference was being made because it suited, I would say, certain outlooks. But again, let's leave the arguments about the causes to one side. It shows you how disinformation can be weaponized. Now, there's two aspects to this, I suppose, to keep in mind. Disinformation is where somebody sits down and they consciously plan to sow seeds of confusion and doubt and incorrect information. Misinformation is where you have people just get things wrong and repeat it. And I would argue that all it takes is a few merchants of disinformation and then add in misinformation where people unwittingly become carriers of that kind of erroneous information. So the truth of the matter was, aid to civil power, it's been in existence for a long time. I myself, during my time serving as a regular member of the Defence Forces, would have participated in a number of ATCP operations. This inference that this was new or this was being used in a different way or in a somehow illegal way was incorrect. I would argue too that, again, despite people's motivations, I think we can all agree that at the end of the day, and I give some credit to the protesters for this as well, that everything ended without any major violence or destruction. So on a positive note, we're a small country. I think the lines of linkage between state and people are not as bad as they are made out to be. We don't live in an authoritarian dictatorship. But I do think it has pointed out one thing, Fran. One of our biggest threats isn't going to be kinetic or some major tactic by some malign interference. I think the biggest threat that we need to be careful of is a lack of awareness amongst people these days on how their state works, how civic society works. We have a means by which people can make grievances known and address issues. And we have various organisations that have a mandate within the state. And I'm not talking about purely state bodies or political parties. There's a whole variety. And we need to be mindful that we have those things and not throw our hands up in the air and say the sky is falling in and we have to go from 0 to 60 very quickly. Because that can be something that we end up doing the most damage to ourselves.
Interesting, but what we were hearing, particularly on the programme last week, was that some of the organisations that you're making reference to there, Declan, people no longer have confidence in them because they see these organisations as almost in bed with the government in some sort of a fashion. So therefore you had the frustration, the annoyance the anger and the protests that we saw last week?
Well, look, that's a fair point, I suppose, that people have lost confidence. But is that justified? Because at the end of the day, did the resolution come about through purely people power, or did it come about by a number of different organisations being brought into the fray? The government were adamant that they weren't going to sit down and negotiate with people that they felt had no clear mandate.
Yes.
And the government have a point with this too, because, again, with the best will in the world, when people put themselves out as spokespersons and leaders of an organisation, that means they have full control of that organisation and people. That's why they have the mandate. This wasn't the case. It wasn't clear in this situation. And this is when you have the potential. I don't want to revisit all of the issues, but I'm talking about going forward. But in this case, you had something that was a set of homegrown issues as a result of something far away, like the war in Iran led to a number of these issues. But I would argue that you also had a lot of people attach themselves to this that had other grievances to display and to manifest. I mean, you had scratched the surface. You had people that were arguing about immigration. They were arguing about other issues. There were people that had been on the fringes of the anti-COVID regulations and things of that nature. And I think this is just something we have to take on board, that there is a palpable mood at times of anger and distrust with the state. It's not peculiar to Ireland. I think it's something that has manifested across Europe. And it's a frustration at times about things that we have no control over. And our state have to look at that and make sure that these impulses are not usurped or manipulated by those who had a malign intent. And that's where I come back when you have external states of concern, to use the phrase that the government used. And in this case, coming into the European presidency, we have seen that Russia has a vested interest in destabilising the European Union because of its activities and its intent on wanting to expand and to take Ukraine and variations on that theme. It's a contest between two philosophies, one that's authoritarian and one that's democratic. And we have to be mindful of not giving those who have malign intent an easy win, because whatever they do isn't directed purely at Ireland, it's directed at Europe as a whole. And going forward during our 6 months of European Union presidency, we want to come through this where we contribute something useful and not be a weak point that's used to damage ourselves and our European Union partners and others as a whole.
Can I ask you then, finally, President Donald Trump, now he's saying the United States Navy will begin blockading the Strait of Hormuz immediately after those peace talks between the US and Iran and Pakistan just ended without agreement. This is something else that's just imposed upon us now as well. The result of this is what, Declan?
Well, Fran, I can't begin to really understand what goes through Donald Trump's head. I mean, one thing I can say, I suppose, is that whatever he says, we can take with a pinch of salt. It's what he does. And it's very hard to figure out where he's going with this. Other than that, I do think he wants to get the Iranians back to the table. And I think they're going to fashion a deal of some sort, because at the end of the day, both sides, you can't believe a word, I think, out of the mouths of either Donald Trump or the Iranians at this point. They're both capable of saying whatever they need to say to affect an outcome in their favour. And let's not forget, the Iranian regime is odious. It's the biggest threat to its own people that it has been for quite some time. However, what do they want? They want to survive. That's their primary objective. What does Donald Trump want? I think he wants to get the hell out of there and manufacture some sort of a win that he can sell to the MAGA faithful. So the wild card, as I understand it in all of this, are the Israelis. Can Donald Trump successfully put a muzzle on Netanyahu and his activities? Because if he keeps attacking and with the severity that he has done Lebanon and indeed Iran, then no deal can stay on the table. But if he can get them into the fold to follow his outcomes of negotiations, then we get back to where we started with an uneasy peace. And I think the driving force here is that both the Iranians and Donald Trump want an end to this. They both have their own reasons. They both want to get away with some degree of being intact. And I think at the end of the day, the Israelis probably realise that Donald Trump, he's been manipulated by them, but he's starting to come under pressure from his own base. You saw Joe Kent, the former counter-terrorism advisor, resign. Now, Kent himself, if you look at his utterances, is quite a headbanger. But even he found some of Donald Trump's stances and moves too much to take. And he wasn't acting purely, on his own opinion. He would have been reflecting, I would argue, the opinions of quite a number of people within the MAGA camp. So it's indicative that I think there are strains appearing there. And of course, we've seen others. We've seen Marjorie Taylor Greene being heavily critical. One of Donald Trump's former close allies. You've seen him fire Kristi Noem. You've seen Pete Hegseth start to, act like a man without any reason, which is quite concerning given he's the Secretary of Defense of the United States, or Secretary of War, as he likes to term it himself. So we've got a lot of irrationality going on in there, and a lot of bellicose rhetoric. But at the end of the day, I think what's important for us here on this side of the Atlantic, and I think we see it with the other European leaders such as Starmer and Macron, and indeed our own Micheál Martin, is not to react to the rhetoric, but just to try and tune that out, because it's really noise, and look at what the actions are, and then act accordingly. So from an Irish point of view, I suppose, and not just an Irish, a European point of view, we can take certain heart, though. It seems appalling, and it's very depressing, and you can understand how ordinary people, when they're being bombarded with this, especially through social media, where there isn't much sober analysis, and there's a lot of disinformation. But there are some positives, some lights in the horizon. Viktor Orban has finally been kicked out by the Hungarian people. That's a triumph, not just for democracy in Hungary, but for the European Union. Not alone did he get kicked out, but he lost by a significant majority, which means that the new incumbent can undo some of the damage Orban did to the Hungarian constitution, which means that Hungary can get back into being a contributing member and a responsible member of the community of nations that is the European Union. Because heretofore you were looking at a situation that, well, it was quite obvious that Hungary was acting as a shill for both the interests of Russia and indeed Donald Trump to some extent. What is highly ironic is that you had an authoritarian leader who had both the backing of the US and Russia. So I think it's a reminder to us in Europe that we really have to keep working on developing Europe into an independent, cohesive entity in terms of its economic and political stances, in terms of its defence, severing the defence dependency on the US.
Declan,
developing.
I do beg your pardon. Thank you so much for coming on with us, Declan. We always appreciate your time. Thank you. Good morning to you. Declan Power there, a former Irish Army soldier, indeed, defence analyst and author. And what do you think about that conversation? We'd love your reaction to that. 083 311 3311.
Tipp FM's Tipp Today.
With Slattery's Garage, Puck On. Main Peugeot dealers in the Premier County. And now stocking the full range of the luxury French car brand DS Automobiles. Book your test drive today with Slattery's Garage, Puck On. See slatterysgarage.ie. Tipp Today, in association with Slattery's of Puckon, your main Peugeot dealer for over 50 years in the Premier County. slatterysgarage.ie.
Welcome back to Tipp Today. I'm joined now by Minister for Tourism, Culture, Sports and Media, Patrick O'Donovan. Good morning to you, Minister.
Morning, Féin, and morning to your listeners in Tipperary and West Limerick. And East Limerick.
Indeed. And thank you so much for making time for us today. I put it to Deputy Michael Murphy earlier on in the hour, Minister, that most people are in agreement at this point that the handling of the crisis last week was an absolute disaster. Is there much for you to learn from this?
Oh, look, there is, definitely. I think the most important thing all of us can learn is that democracy is a very fragile thing. And while we have enjoyed continuous democracy in this country since 1922, we're Europe's fourth longest continuing serving democracy, you have to invest in it. And you have to be prepared to stand up for it. And you have to be prepared to accept the fact that at times it's jeopardised. And, I'm a firm believer in the right to protest. I am a firm believer in the right to assemble. I'm a democratic Republican. But what I am not is somebody that believes that you can condone or in any way acquiesce to or support illegal blockades, and that you would put the legitimacy of the state and its institutions under threat. And really that came to a head with the blockading of Whitegate. Ironically, it was being reported on Harty News on one particular evening that there was nobody at Whitegate, and it was almost like a flare went up. There's nobody here in Whitegate at the moment, come on down. And then, of course, they started gathering, and the rest is history. So, one of the things I will be doing is examining it as well from a media and coverage point of view, particularly social media, and particularly from a balanced point of view. There's a lot of people who agree with protest, but they don't agree with the mechanism. They didn't agree with the blockading of the port. There was a lot of people stuck in traffic around Limerick on the M50 and O'Connell Street. A lot of people missed appointments and things like that. I didn't see too much of their grievance. There was a lot of businesses that were at risk of going under because of the supply chain. I didn't see too many of those people get airtime. A lot of hospital appointments were missed. I didn't hear too many doctors being asked how things were in particular hospitals. So look, there's a lot of lessons that have to be taken from this, but the most important is democracy is fragile. Outside actors can come in and manipulate particular grievances. And I know the people I represent, and I know that they are fairly to the pin of their collar with regard to expenditure at the end of the working week. And I hope that this excise duty cuts goes some way in that. But I also know that there was malign actors. And when you got in under the bonnet with regard to some of them, there was xenophobic comments thrown at you, and some of the abuse that was levelled at.
Right, but would you not agree, Minister, that the majority, and by far and away the majority of people out protesting, were people with genuine grievances?
Oh, no, sure, absolutely. Sure, some of them are my neighbours. Some of them will be supporters.
Sure, and if you take that poll where 56% of people told Ireland thinks that they agreed with the actions of the fuel protesters, even though they were discommoded by it.
It was important to have a fuel protest, but what was not important was a fuel blockade. And where you had a situation where you had 6 million litres of petrol and diesel sitting in Galway Bay about to be turned away, or where you had a situation where the Canadian owners of the oil refinery were potentially turning away ships and turning off the refinery. That's not a protest. That's an illegal gathering. That's a direct undermining of the state. That's a direct undermining of our democracy. And that's where, I've no problem with protests. I've no problem with slow-moving convoys. No problem with that at all. In fact, I support them. Because the strength of a democracy goes to how a government can respond to those who don't agree with those in power. However, there is a fine line, and that line was passed when critical infrastructure was blocked illegally. And it could be argued. Some people innocently were carried along by that, probably not realising the extent of their action.
It could be argued that it got to that point because of the inaction of the government, and the government coming out. And some of the language used, I'm sure you'll agree, I'm sure you'll look back at some of the language used and rethink it.
If the government had acted earlier with regard to An Garda Síochána, me and you would be having a totally different conversation, because you'd be saying, oh, you're not giving them a chance to have a protest, and you're taking the heavy hand of the law too quickly. So look, the guards are probably damned if they do and damned if they don't here, and there'll be a review by the Minister.
That's not quite what I meant. What I meant was that the government coming out and name calling and saying that people are sabotaging the state and criminality and all of this sort of thing, when the majority of people that they were addressing were just ordinary people that were so frustrated and so beaten down.
But the word sabotage was used by the Taoiseach, and he wasn't referring to the vast majority. He used that word in the context of an interview with regard to Whitegate. Now, what would you call the direct blockading of the country's only oil refinery and the potential turning off of that refinery and the potential turning away of millions of litres of petrol and diesel from the country? What would you call it?
I'd call it largely a huge frustration and an anger that spilled out and that wasn't contained in any way. That's what I would call it.
So there was a place for anger and frustration. Absolutely no problem with that. But I don't think that the place for anger and frustration was to deny chickens in County Limerick meal, to deny cattle feed, to deny people hospital appointments, to deny people the right to the access to Dublin Airport. I don't think that the frustration, led to the right to having a ship in Galway Bay not to be allowed to be docked. And I don't think that right to frustration allowed for wardens to be appointed on the M7 to decide who got in and out of Limerick. I don't think that. I believe that people had a right to protest, and sometimes I feel like protesting myself. But I don't believe that some people, without being attested to Garda Síochána, have the right to say to a pregnant woman that she can or she cannot get to St. Munchin's Hospital in Limerick because her waters are broken.
Should you not have spoken to representatives of the protesters, do you think?
We speak to representatives of all sectors of society and the economy constantly. And they're the Irish Road Haulage Association, the Irish Creamery Milk Suppliers Association, the Irish Farmers Association, the ICSA. I have a huge amount of them myself, unions and non-pub.
Yeah, sure, but the hauliers and the farmers out there don't seem to have any faith in these organisations anymore because they think they're in bed with the government.
We have a long established history in this country, going back to 1922. We're the fourth longest continuing serving democracy. And the reason that we are is that we value the ballot box, we value the outcome of the ballot box, we value the fact that the people who run the country are derived from Dáil Éireann, and from that they negotiate on behalf of the people of Ireland through a democratically elected government with properly constituted organisations. And the properly constituted organisations in this case are those that hold AGMs, who have a known chairperson, a known secretary, and who deal with government. On the day that, for instance, 4 people's names were put forward, one poor man standing above an O'Connell bridge said, "Well, I know nothing about Whitegate or Féin, so you've no point in talking to me about that." Now, how could a government, in all sense and reason, try and engage with that sort of?
But you did bring protesters to you did bring protesters to government buildings and then said no, they couldn't take part.
No, we didn't.
Well, they're telling us that they were invited. Were they not invited?
No, they weren't. No, they weren't. I mean, the representative organisations were invited. It was up to the individual representative organisations who they decided to bring with them and who they decided not to bring with them. That case has been well answered. The government spoke to and dealt with the representative organisations. If the representative organisations decided to bring whoever they wanted to bring, that was entirely up to them. They didn't do that. But after the negotiations, we were in a position, and I think we've moved on from that now, to a situation where Ireland has now responded not only once but twice with the largest per capita investment by any government in the European Union into the fuel crisis.
So the protest or the blockade, as you might describe it, worked then, essentially, because you wouldn't have moved on this without the protest.
Because we were in discussions with these organisations anyway. And actually, if anything, the blockades failed because diesel and petrol prices were actually coming down. And Fuels for Ireland had said that the diesel and petrol prices were coming down last week, but ironically not because of a fuel shortage, but because of a distribution crisis caused by blockades in Whitegate, Fines, Galway and elsewhere. The prices didn't come down. Not only did the prices didn't come down, the pumps ran dry. So we now have a situation where the government has reduced excise duty on petrol by nearly 40%, excise duty on diesel by nearly 50%, and excise duty on green diesel by 31%. Like, these are massive sums of money, and these are taxes that are foregone. So for health, education, social welfare, rural development and everything else, agriculture and everything else in Tipperary, that we might have liked to have done in 2027 will now obviously have to be put under the spotlight for budget discussions, because it'll invariably eat into the amount of money that we'll have available to us in 2027. And by the way, a lot of people, probably on your show, because I've done a lot of commercial radio stations, were advocating for this, that and the other. They never said how they were going to pay for it. They never said who was going to pay for it. And they never said what cuts were going to be implemented in future budgets to pay for it.
Yeah, well, you've hit on something interesting now that we hear about on the programme. That's fine. I take on board what you're saying to me. But we seem to be able to find money for everything else, for all sorts of other stuff.
Like what?
Like investing in iPass, for example. That comes up on this programme all of the time.
Should that not be done?
No,
Should iPass not be invested?
Do you know what's very important, Minister, is that what I'm relaying to you now is what our listeners are saying to me, so you can make what you will of that.
Should we not provide money for people that are coming to Ireland, for instance, from Palestine?
But I mean, no, you're just deliberately picking out something from. I mean, the whole big issue of immigration is a huge issue, as you know, and it's huge with our listeners, in terms of what we're spending on that.
But I mean, to comply with our obligations under the European Union and the United Nations, are you suggesting that we shouldn't invest in iPads?
Now you know what people are going to be shouting. What about your obligations to the people of Ireland in terms of them being to the pin of their collar?
Our obligations to the people of Ireland, we enunciate them every week in Dáil Éireann. And by the way, there's a lot of people that come into Ireland through iPass centres that wind up as Irish citizens and who pay tax and who work and whose taxes will wind up being used in the relief that we're putting in yesterday, which is the largest of its kind in Europe. But government is about making choices, and opposition is about making choices.
Tipp FM's Tip Today.
With Slattery's Garage, Puck On. Main Peugeot dealers in the Premier County. And now stocking the full range of the luxury French car brand DS Automobiles. Book your test drive today with Slattery's Garage, Puck On. See slatterysgarage.ie. Tip Today, in association with Slattery's of Puckon, your main Peugeot dealer for over 50 years in the Premier County. slatterysgarage.ie.
Thanks, Pat, and welcome back to the second hour of Tip Today, 1800 938 007. I'm joined now by Independent Councillor Liam Brown. Good morning to you, Liam.
Good morning.
And thanks for taking our call this morning. A couple of things, Liam, because you were involved in the protests over the last week. You're making an interesting point, though. You're saying the government knew that the fuel protests were going to take place and that they did nothing. What informs you about that?
They did, Féin, and what informs me is I've seen the email that was sent to government 2 weeks ago. It was given to me by some of the guys on the protest that Tuesday evening, the day of the beginning of the protest. I think I put it up online on Wednesday. They were fully aware that there had been a meeting in Portlaoise amongst contractors, hauliers, agribusinesses, saying to the government that they were going to need help and they were going to need reductions in the costs of doing business. Otherwise, they would have had no option but to have a protest. But that was completely ignored. Basically, what the government said was they were going to talk to the established organisations like the Hauliers Association, like the IFA. But many of the people who were on the protest last week, they're not members of those organisations. They're not big businesses. They're, I suppose, in many cases, I call it the man in the van. The person who needs a vehicle for work, who's not looking after 40, 50 lorries and has the power to be involved in a hauliers association which can meet government that's dropped the hat. But these people did get together, they did speak to government, they did send communication to government and ask the government to sit down and talk to them, and they were ignored, Féin.
Tell me, I mean, do you think that the protest has succeeded when you see the government package now, or do protesters feel that they've succeeded, Liam?
Look, there's been a level of success, Féin, because to be honest, there wouldn't be any package if they hadn't gone out onto the roads. So from that point of view, yes, there was some bit of success, but I don't think the package is good enough. I don't think it goes far enough. I think it's going to cause even bigger problems for a lot of the people who were out on the protest, and also for householders. It's short term. We're stuck once again with short term thinking. To me, it was something put together over a weekend just to stop the protests. But if we don't have a proper long term view, proper long term planning of one, fuel security, and two, secure prices that people can plan their business and make business decisions into the future, well, I think we're just running down the road of even bigger problems in the future.
Now, the government would tell you, and I was speaking to Minister Patrick O'Donovan just before 10 o'clock there now, that, it's not an open-ended purse in terms of the availability of monies here, and, we have to look to the future and the possibility of things going really wrong on a global scale. What do you make of that argument from the government, Liam?
I listened to Patrick O'Donovan, and I'm going to be absolutely honest, it was a belligerent interview. It was an interview that was, in my opinion, completely out of touch. Patrick O'Donovan is a minister who is very used to talking down to people. I've listened to him in the past. I think he's done it once again there on your radio station. I'm quite angry after listening, to be quite honest. He didn't seem to give any indication of any sympathy towards the problems that people felt. And I'm going to be absolutely honest about it, Fran. Politically, an awful lot of the people who were on the protest last week, from the farming community and the small business community, would have been Fine Gael supporters in the past. And I can't imagine how too many of them would be happy listening to Patrick O'Donovan talking down to him like he just did on the radio this morning. Look, a package had to be put together. But the reality is we're seeing that the people in small haulage businesses, small business people, and ordinary householders are struggling for a long time now. It's not just today or yesterday or last week that they decided that enough was enough. This has been something which has been building up over the past. Now, if you put in a package which runs out at the end of June, what then, Frank? Do all the prices go back up? Do the rebates disappear? How is anybody supposed to sit down and sign a contract that goes beyond 3 months? How is anybody supposed to take a job? This is going to cost more businesses, Frank, because people are just not going to take a chance. And I'm not sure your listeners probably don't know it yet, but a major agricultural contracting business in Navan this morning decided to shut up shop and close down because they said they cannot plan into the future with the way things are going. And then you have Patrick O'Donovan coming out. And, a lot of what was said by government last week and a lot of what was said by government spokespeople last week, Fran, made people very, very angry. And I think, it's just shown that the likes of Patrick O'Donovan is still not listening. He's still, there was very much a let them eat cake about what he just said there now. That we have to do this and people don't understand. And people don't understand the tough job that Patrick O'Donovan has to do. But what's really tough, Fran? Getting up at 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning to go out to work and not sure you won't be able to afford the petrol or diesel when it gets to the station. That's really tough, Fran. Or coming home in the evening time and not sure are you going to be able to turn on the heating oil? Are you going to be able to turn your heat to warm your house? That's pretty tough as well. And I guarantee you that's something that Patrick O'Donovan doesn't ever have to worry about.
And what he was questioning was not the legitimacy of some of the argument, but the blockades. And he was talking about the oil refinery, and he was talking about the fuel depots and the like. What do you say to that? And as you know, the government described that as sabotaging the nation.
Does Patrick O'Donovan honestly think, Fran, that those people want to be on the road for 6 days last week? Those are working people, Fran. The people who protested this week, and this was a big change from protests I've seen in the past, when people go up to Dublin for a couple of hours, and in all fairness, a lot of them are a bit of a jolly up in Dublin, walking down the street, shouting the same slogans over and over again. The people who I met last week, Fran, for 6 days, are people who did not want to be there, people who had lorries tied up for 6 days that could have been working, who had tractors tied up for 6 days that could have been working. These are people who just want a break, who just want to be listened to. And like I said at the start of the interview, and you asked me about it, these were people who had told the likes of Patrick O'Donovan 2 weeks ago that they were going to have no option but to do what they did. What they did, Fran, was the last thing they could have done was to actually stand out on the road and be listened to. Because they wouldn't have been listened to, Fran, if they did. What we're constantly getting was, why don't you go to Dublin and why don't you protest at the Dáil? Fran, I've been up to the Dáil, and I'm sure you've been up to the Dáil. There's 3 or 4 protests walking up and down in front of the gates of Dáil every single day. And I guarantee your listeners will find it hard to name one of them or what they're protesting for, because they're ignored by the government as well. You'll get a couple of TDs, the local TDs will come out to them, they'll offer to bring him in and buy him a cup of coffee, and they'll offer to sit down and listen to him, and we'll do nothing about it. Let me just give you an example, Frank. We've heard the crying out of government last week about people missing hospital appointments. And I have huge sympathy about anybody who missed a hospital appointment or who missed treatment. But that was used as an excuse against the protesters. We don't hear anything about the scoliosis patients who've been waiting 6 and 7 years of missing treatments. We don't hear anything about the people who are on, I spoke to a man yesterday whose daughter is on a 12-month waiting list for to be looked at by an ophthalmologist because they're afraid that their future sight will be damaged in the long term. But you'll come out and you'll say, oh yeah, Mary missed an appointment to the doctor. I was at the protest. They were letting people through. They were asking people if they need to go through. Ambulances were pushed were any hassle. Sorry, Féin, I'm a little bit angry now even saying this. We're listening to the likes of Patrick O'Donovan coming on with his attitude and the way he talked down to people and the way he continues to talk down to people. That's what the people on the protest were so annoyed about. They feel that they are the ones who are the backbone of the country. They pay their taxes. They work. They've one of the highest tax regimes on fuel in Europe. And yet they get talked down to when they talk back, when they have the temerity to talk back to government, because that's the attitude that Micheál Martin had, that Jim O'Callaghan had, that Simon Harris had, and listen this morning to Patrick O'Donovan. How dare these people talk back to them? Well, maybe they should talk back to them an awful lot more and an awful lot louder, because I don't think Patrick O'Donovan was listening last week to what was said. As far as he was concerned, the people who were on the roads were not more than an inconvenience to him and his colleagues.
Well,
sorry for saying that.
Well, he said he promoted the notion that people should have the right to protest, and that, sometimes he felt like protesting himself. And I think the point that he was making was that how far it went in terms of what they are now calling the blockades and stuff. Is it done now, Liam? Is this done now?
I don't think so, Féin. I genuinely don't think so.
Will people go back on our motorways now, do you think? Is it?
Whether they will or they won't, I'm not sure. I would hate to think they would have to. And that's what we should be doing. We should be listening an awful lot more to ordinary people. Like, for example, Féin, nothing was done on home heat fuel in the package. Yeah. Absolutely nothing. Now, we're probably lucky that we're heading into the middle of April and coming on to May, and the temperatures outside are going up a bit. So we don't need it as much as we did. But, if this had been last October, would they have done the same thing?
Right, well, they did a few cent. They did a few cent to it, but the point there is that the European directives are determining what they can do about the home heating oil.
Fine. We've got to give up on this. The European directives. The European directives don't seem to be able to tell the Spanish what to do when they're selling petrol for $1.50 a litre, or the Maltese when they're selling diesel for $1.21. So
what are you saying, Liam, that we're not fighting our cause enough in Europe? Is that it?
Yeah, we're not. We're not fighting our cause in Europe. We're going, do you know what it is, Féin? We have the presidency of the European Union coming up, and Micheál Martin is fighting his life of saying boo to anybody in Europe because he wants to be paraded around Europe like the best boy for 6 months. Like, the Polish, and funnily enough, I spoke to quite a few Polish people on the protest who came out and protested the same way. That maybe they're a bit better to protest than the Irish because of their own past. Like, the Polish government dropped VAT from 23% to 8%, a 15% drop in VAT, for a period of time until we get over the hump. We've our guys coming out going, oh, we can't drop that. Oh, we can't drop this. We can't drop that. The reality is, Féin, the Irish government set out a budget last October, and they had an estimate for fuel. They had an estimate for tax take on fuel for the next 12 months based on a cost of fuel that was an awful lot lower than it is now. They've been making a profit while this has been going on, Féin. Every single time the price of petrol at the pump goes up by 10 cents, that's an extra 6 cents to the government. They could bring it back to the price that they made the estimate on in the first place back last October. But
surely one of the positives around this, Liam, has to be that at least there's a conversation opening up now about carbon tax.
Absolutely. And Féin, look, I've been talking about that on your show God knows how many times. Carbon tax is a scam, Féin. And we're going to have people coming on from the environmentalist point of view and from the green point of view talking about, the world is going to burn up in 2 months' time if we don't put on carbon tax. The reality is, Féin, we're trying to save the world by increasing tax in Ireland. And we have the Americans and Iranians and Chinese and God knows what, burning coal all over the place, bombing the crap out of Iran. What are they fooling us? It's like UFC, Féin. It's a nice way of saying, we have to put on a tax to help people. But it's only temporary. It's only until we get the climate under control. It's only until we retrofit all these houses. You said yourself this morning there, Féin, many of the retrofit schemes that are coming in, most people can't afford them. It's easy to give somebody a grant of €4,000 off of their doors and windows if they spend €20,000 to put the windows in. Many people can afford to do that nowadays. It's basically, to my mind, it's directing money into people's pockets who already can prove that they don't need the money in the first place. I mean, it's really unfair. But every single person has to pay the cost of it. It doesn't matter whether you can afford new windows or doors or not, or whether you can afford solar panels or not. You still have to pay the carbon tax that's going to go to the grant for the people who can afford those things. It's not fair, Fran.
Was there, I mean, is there some sort of seismic shift, do you think, in this country that was kicked off last week?
I do think that. I absolutely do think that. I tell you, I'll go back to something I said a few minutes ago. You know, there's been protests up and down this country for years, and it's the same lads at the front of the protests with the loud hailers making up a catchy slogan, walking down O'Connell Street from the Garden of Remembrance down to the end of the street, and it's all forgotten about after about 2 days, and they're waiting for the next protest to go on. The people who protested last week, Fran, are ordinary working people. There are people who never go to a protest on a normal day. They're Fianna Fáil voters, they're Fine Gael voters who are extremely unhappy with the people that they voted for and how they've been treated and how they treated them. You know, they just want to get on with their life. The social contract, in my opinion, is broken at this stage. We have people who just thought that their job was to, you know, get up out of bed and go to work, pay their taxes, buy themselves a house, put their kids through college. Those kids then would come out with a decent education. They would get a job. They would buy a house. They would have kids, and the cycle would carry on. We're now left in a stage, Fran, where our brightest and best are getting on planes once again, going to Australia and England and America. When they're trying to buy a house, Fran, they cannot afford a house, and God only knows what the cost of the increased fuel will have on construction costs over the next 12 months. We're coming out of college with good educations but bad wages, but the cost of everything has gone up.
Can I ask you finally, Liam, the relationship with the Gardaí, has that been damaged?
I think some people have seen the Gardaí act in a way that they didn't think they would. I would hate to think that I'm going to be honest, I would hate to think the relationship with the Gardaí is damaged. The Gardaí have a tough job. I mean, yesterday evening, I came away from the protest yesterday evening, and, you know, I got a phone call from a person who needed Garda assistance in Cashel, and the guards went down and they sorted it out within an hour. You know, the ordinary Garda on the ground is a decent person, just want to go to work. But I think that the minister left his own people down last week. I think that what happened in Whitegate was disgraceful. I think it was way over Harty. No Garda should ever need to pull pepper spray out on an ordinary person at a demonstration. Because, as you're saying there, Patrick O'Donovan will come on and say that people have the right to protest. But then when they protest, they're beaten off the streets by Gardaí and pepper sprayed. I know it could have turned nastier, and it could have turned nastier among people who, right, I guarantee, have never had an interaction with the Gardaí in a bad way in their life, who are going to be left with an awful sour taste in their mouth.
What the minister would probably say to you there is that if the Gardaí didn't intervene like that, we'd all be sitting with no diesel or petrol in our cars this week. So
no fun. I'll tell the minister what. If the minister had sat down last Tuesday evening with people and spoke to them, if they hadn't turned away the leaders of the protest from Leinster House on Wednesday, last Tuesday it was said to the government, this can all finish in 5 minutes if they just agree to talk. They didn't agree to talk. Fran, Micheál Martin threatened to bring the army out on his own people. I think Micheál Martin should resign. I genuinely do. I think it's time for him to go now. If the only way you can, if the only way you can have a discussion with already decent people about the plight they're suffering in their life,
it was Jim O'Callaghan
put the army on them.
Right, but it was the Minister for Justice that came up with that. So in terms of the
they act in lockstep, Fran. You know, they have cabinet responsibility. The Minister for Justice didn't say anything that he wasn't told to say.
Well, he's at odds with Helen McEntee over this now. So, you know.
Of course he is, because Helen McEntee at least has good sense to realise that you should never threaten to put the army out on your own people, and you know that hasn't happened. We're not a tin pot dictatorship. You know, we're not something that that out in the middle of Africa. But that was the first response. And another thing, Fran, before we go, I'd like to say that I'm really, really annoyed about it, was the demonisation of people on the protest, and this whole far right nonsense again, Fran. You know, this is the new bogeyman. You know, the protests have been infiltrated by the far right. The protests have been led by the far right. They haven't. They were led by ordinary people who just want to go about their day's work. But is that what the government are going to come out with every single time now? If you wave a tricolour, Fran, you're some sort of far-right lunatic. I mean, talking about Tommy Robinson potentially be behind protests. Like, that's only scare tactics to actually stop people from lifting their head and talking up and talking back to them, Fran. If we can't have a proper political discussion in this country without that being thrown at anybody who has the temerity to talk up for themselves, well, then I think we're going to have to ask what the people on the other side of the discussion want from people, because that should not have happened either.
All right.
Like, the people on those protests were not far right, Fran, but I tell you one thing, they were far wrong either.
All right, Liam, thanks.
They should have spoke up for themselves, and they did, and fair play to them.
All right, thanks and good morning to you, Liam. That's Councillor Liam Brown speaking to us from Cashel this morning. 1800 938 007.
Tipp FM's Tip Today.
With Slattery's Garage, Puck On. Main Peugeot dealers in the Premier County. And now stocking the full range of the luxury French car brand DS Automobiles. Book your test drive today with Slattery's Garage, Puck On. See slatterysgarage.ie. Tip Today, in association with Slattery's of Pecan, your main Peugeot dealer for over 50 years in the Premier County. slatterysgarage.ie.
Regular contributor to Tip Today, security consultant and the founder of Seesaw, Joe Leahy, joins me now. Good morning to you, Joe.
Good morning, Fran.
Good to talk to you today, Joe. You've been watching the events of the last week unfold. Your thoughts, Joe?
Yeah, it's been a difficult week, Fran. I suppose as the old saying, all these old things come back. A week is a long time in politics. I honestly think, Fran, there's lessons to be learned from both sides. I think a huge amount of frustration has been vented in the past week, and there was times there, Fran, we got very near a tipping point. And I think at this stage, everybody needs to step back, absolutely everybody, and just take 24, 48 hours. A bit of calmness is called for now, Fran, and let's bring it on then to the next stage.
Do I gather from some of what you were saying to Leanne that are you afraid of a domino effect, a fallout from the protest now?
Yeah, I think, Fran, you see, traditionally in Ireland, we've always dealt with organisations, and an organisation is structured in its own way. There's the chairperson, the secretary, the treasurer, etc. That happened always throughout the country. On this occasion, that didn't appear to be the case, from what I could see and what I watched. And I think as a result of it, I think that brought its own problems. Because then, no matter who if you did a deal with the people in Galway, did the people in Cork accept that, or did the people in Wexford accept that? There didn't appear to be any of this leadership. There was a few spokespersons brought out, but were they representing everybody or not? Because if you look at it when the four people that went to the Dáil or to the meeting in Dublin, three of them apparently were from Galway. So I just wonder, how will this affect the rest of society? Will other aspects of society come along and say, hold on, 1 second now, they got something out of this, but we got nothing out of it. Look at the cost of a pound of butter, look at the cost of a hotel room, look at the cost of food. Look at the cost of living in every aspect. How many people will be happy with this?
Yeah, my only fear, and it's one of the main things I'm taking out of this, is that there's a whole bunch of people in this country now that feel that they're not represented by anybody, by the usual organisations, the hauliers organisation, the farming organisations, or indeed the politicians. They feel like they're going it alone in some sort of a fashion, Joe, and that's I think, resulting in the protests.
Yeah, you're right, Fran, and it has been going on for a long time, Fran, and it's scary. If you look back, you go back to the politics and the traditions back in the years, you had a couple of political parties out there, and then you had Tony Gregory arrived as one of these first independents, and off he went, and as you said, the rest is history. People aren't joining these associations anymore. People aren't joining trade unions anymore. People aren't, they're not involved in the Catholic Church anymore. You see the GA out there, and some clubs are struggling to field teams. So the whole thing right across rural Ireland, Fran, is taking a hit on this.
And I can see some of the issues, like as life changes as people go on. Young people, they don't want to get involved in an awful lot of these things. They just don't. But what you had here was clearly a rural movement that came out, and stopped and protested, and they demanded they were listened to. But it's also ironic how many of them were not involved in their own organisations. In organisations that you'd expect them to be involved in, not so much their own organisation.
Yeah, I was surprised that more people didn't pick up on what Deputy Seamus Healy said to me last week, because he, as you know, Joe, staunch trade unionist all of his life, and he made the point that there are issues now with the hierarchy of trade unions in terms of not being representative of the ordinary people. I thought that was a very big statement from him.
Well, yeah, but it's the truth, Fran, and if you look at it the way life has gone, people out there, you see, if you're on a representative association of some sort and you're going to meet the heads of that organisation, let it be politicians or let it be trade union leaders or whatever they are, there's this assumption that you're all cosy enough to these and that you're one-to-one and that you're all, in cahoots with them, and then you're delivering less. And that is where the rebellionist then knocks back and comes out of. That's where the people on the ground then aren't happy. And this is, I suppose, like where, communication is key. And if you look at any meetings, any organisations, people in this country, they tend to go to an organisation or something when there's a problem. It's like the hurling, you know what I mean? You won't be able to get a ticket for the match next Sunday. But who goes to the first round of the league, People are, they're wired different now, Fran, in the sense that their demands are different and what they get involved in is different. Look at how many organisations are out there now crying out for volunteers. But the Ireland that we knew has changed, Fran.
And last week, was it the crossing of some sort of a Rubicon? I want to be careful about hyperbole here, but was it? Did it change things, do you think, Joe?
Oh, I think it did, Fran, and I think we were at Boiling Point, Fran, and it was I think you could nearly say Ireland as a country, we nearly got away with it, if you understand me. Had this thing not been brought to a successful conclusion, and I don't mean success now as winners and losers, I mean that had it not been de-escalated,
yes,
then we were in trouble. And I was listening there to Liam Brown there earlier on, and I was listening about some of the things that Liam was saying. But what happens with these protests, you see, is when they start, if a protest is organised, you see, by an organisation, then there's a few leaders you can deal with those people. But when protests are started then by these other groupings, which are not, I suppose, recognised, if you can understand that word in the broader sense, then who do you talk to and who do you negotiate with? But equally, how then do you stop these outsiders coming in, which whether we like it or we don't like it, they did come in when they saw the opportunity and the temperature was raised as a result of it.
Well, I mean, there were attempts in Dublin, and in fairness to the farmers, were very quick to, disperse that element that wanted to join the protest in Dublin, certainly.
But you see, isn't this then, you see, Fran, as well, where social media can come out, and isn't it the who shouts loudest and all this, and you go to these unfortunate events that took place, when that I've heard of stories like that's going around there, about intimidation and everything else from every side, Fran. But I'll still go back and I'll still say, and I don't mind when anyone says, I don't think it's right in that roads should be blocked, and that ordinary civilian people should be going out there like me and say, you can't go down there, or we'll only allow 2 trucks in, or we'll only allow 1 lorry out. Or I think that's gone too far, Fran. And I really do. I have no problem with protests. I was involved in myself. I have no problem in organising them. I was involved in myself. But I still think, Fran, that there's a line. Like people are talking about there about the emergency services. There's a lot of emergency services, Fran. A guy out there, Fran, trying to earn a living and pay a mortgage and rearing 2 or 3 or 4 kids. That's an emergency if he can't go to work or she can't go to work.
Sure, but I mean, you can understand that when frustration and anger and inability to just get by, when that boils over, sure, it's going to get extreme. But I mean, you can understand it, though, can't you?
I totally agree with you, Fran, and I totally understand that, and that is why I said at the beginning, we need a bit of calmness. Everybody needs to take a step back. Yeah. At the height of all this, just take a step back and say, hold on now. You see, exams cancelled today, exams. state exams cancelled. Like this has gone. We were very, very near, a boiling point here, which was nearly, if it tipped another couple of hours maybe in the wrong direction, we could have been all in trouble. We could have been facing something totally different.
Can I finally?
And it's sad. It's sad to see that.
Can I finally ask you, Joe, because security is your thing, the relationship, and I'll be speaking to the GRA later on in the programme, but the relationship with the Gardaí, has that been damaged, do you think?
No, I don't think so, Fran. I really don't think so. I think there's an awful lot of silent people out there. You see, people come out, Fran, and they all give their own angle of it, but if you can give a balanced angle to a balanced aspect to this, and be balanced about it. Like if you're asked to move, and the law is there, if you're told to go home, by a guard, and you don't, that guard has power to arrest you and take you to court. Now, so what do? You obey the advice. Now, and this, the problem with these protests, and this is the other side of it, is that most of the people, I can't say from all, but most of the people who are probably sober, totally sober, and absolutely frustrated out of their minds, but they were asked in advance to desist, to move their cars, to move their vehicles, move their tractors, their lorries, and they didn't do it. So what does one do then? Like that's a direct affront to democracy. Understanding their frustrations, understanding everything. And I'm not saying they're not right to protest. But when it comes to the tipping point, when it comes to the 11th hour, and you're asked to desist by a member of the Garda Síochána, and you don't, what are you supposed to do, like? The guards had to do their job, like. Other than that, the people, there'd be total anarchy within another hour. And it was that close, like. That's the truth.
You think it was that close?
I do. I honestly do, Fran. I do, because numbers, as you come in, like we said, towards the weekends and all this kind of thing, Fran, you can join up huge numbers when people aren't working, and all of a sudden, things like this can get out of control very quick, because you go back to the organisations. There's no head of an organisation. There's no person out there in any one group. Like you see today, even though the protests have been set down, there's still more protests going on today. So there's people with all different agendas that will come out of this, Fran. And there's people out there that will say, come on, let's have a cut off this and let's have a cut off that. And that's what they will do, Fran, just to there's people that will create uproar for the sake of creating uproar,
All right, but just finally, Joe, it's interesting to see that poll in the Indo yesterday. I mean, 56% of people believe in what the protesters were doing, even though many of those people were discommoded by them in some way, whether it was travel or lack of diesel and petrol and the like, but still a huge number there.
Yeah, but I think, you see, Fran, it started off in the right way. And I honestly do think it started off in the right way. And I think the peaceful protest was fine. But then when it came to a blockade, then that put a different scenario on the thing altogether. I mean that. I think that changed the mindset of people. And I think when you move on that then to another, like I have thought, something had to be done, Fran. The price of diesel and petrol was gone out through the roof. Something had to be done. And something still needs to be done, Fran, in the sense that I would like to see the government talking to the owners of these filling stations. Like, where's price gouging hasn't been mentioned at all in the past week with all the frustrations of people.
Well, there's complete denial about that, and there was an examination of that, and
correct.
Seemingly, it wasn't the case, if we're to believe what...
There's an awful lot to do.
Yeah.
There's an awful work to be done yet, Fran.
Yeah.
Plus, don't forget, Fran, that the cost of living is increasing on a daily basis. Look, I'll go back again. Look at the cost of a hotel room. Look at the cost of food. Look at the cost of a pound of butter. Look at the cost of heating. No, it's gone out through the roof, Fran.
All right, Joe, I must leave it there. But thanks for coming on with us, Joe. We appreciate it. Thank you
very much.
Thank you. Good morning to you. Regular contributor to Tipp Today over many years there, Joe Leahy. We'll take a break, back in just a moment.
Tipp FM's Tipp Today.
With Slattery's Garage, hook on. Main Peugeot dealers in the Premier County. And now stocking the full range of the luxury French car brand DS Automobiles. Book your test drive today with Slattery's Garage, hook on. See slatterysgarage.ie. Tipp Today, in association with Slattery's of Pecan, your main Peugeot dealer for over 50 years in the Premier County. slatterysgarage.ie.
And you're very welcome back to Tipp today. Now, delighted to be joined in the studio, particularly delighted today by Tom Baughan, who's our bushcraft guru and survivalist and all of that. We are expecting you to bring a little peace to proceedings today, Tom. I was asking you off air, are you able to divorce yourself from the kind of stuff that's been going on over the past 10 days or so?
Well, hello, Fran.
Hello, Tom.
And
how are you?
Hello to your wonderful listeners in this moment of turmoil.
Yes.
Another moment of turmoil.
Yes, indeed.
It's a hard one to not get indulged in, because it realistically affects every single person. And one thing I noticed was, even if you're not a farmer or a truck driver, the power that they need to drive those machines. But even if it's only a small car, when you drive up to fill that engine and you see those numbers, you're basically put in a little bit of fuel and that's it.
Yes.
It's basically taking you nowhere. And I knew a guy years ago, and we'll say, for example, if all he had was £5 in his pocket and that was it, his expression would be when he goes up to the petrol station, see, will it take a fiver? Be careful of the overflow. I would just make it sound.
How times have changed.
How times have changed. If you had 50 now, you're not getting a whole pile. You basically drive from pump to pump.
Yeah. So what about that in terms of finding peace and all the things you talk to us about, peace in nature and all of that? Can we apply that even though this turmoil is going on?
I think we have to. It's not can we. It's we definitely have to, because if we get wound into it really badly, it'll bring our own torments even worse. We do need to find a little bit of extra peace of mind. And when you hear someone saying, I'm going to go for a walk to clear the mind, that's exactly the thoughts I would get when you get this. You're heading into the woods, you're heading out the road for a walk or something like that, just to be out in the fresh air, getting out to clear the mind. And when you are out to clear the mind, I always tell people, when you get outside your door, whatever you're thinking about inside, leave it in there. It'll be waiting for you when you come back. Don't carry it with you. Don't upset your walk or your hike or whatever you're doing. Get out and enjoy. Just clear that mind for a little while. And just try and enjoy it. It will be your problems will be waiting for you when you get home. And if they're not waiting for you when you get home, I'm sure the government will have them sent down to you.
But how do you manage to do that? I mean, you walk out your door and you leave all of the problems behind, but the chattering in your head is going to analyse all of that as you're walking. How can you sort of command that in some way?
Well, hopefully I'm right when I say this, but luckily for me, I'm so indulged in the outdoor world. When I don't just look at a tree, I see a particular tree and what type of tree, and I'd be looking at the buds or the leaves coming out. They're coming out now, and when you see the flowers underneath, if you go into most woodlands now, there'll be full of flowers on the ground. And I always tell people the reason that's happening is because they have to do that now. And if they don't do it now, they can't do it when the leaves come out in the trees, because it's going to block out the sunshine and they won't be able to get
the wonder of nature.
It's the wonder of nature, the natural cycle of nature. And these are the things that take my mind. And it's like finding a little place to set up, a little camp area, if I want to sit down and have a cup of tea. And this is what occupies my mind when I'm out. And the worst thing is the social media, because everywhere you look on social media now, you're seeing what's going on in the country. And even if you're not on social media, you're going to see it and hear it absolutely everywhere you go. I'd say it's one time that there's more ears tuned into the radio and more eyes on the television, that people are just so frustrated, and you cannot blame them. Enough basically is enough.
Yes, but what you're describing is, we hear it all the time at this point, mindfulness. You're talking about to be aware of the moment that you're in and what's around you when you're strolling in the woods or walking in the woods.
That's exactly what I do. I was actually at a few events lately and different things, but I'd take time to walk away and just look at a tree, and I'd see the buds the way they're opening, just to be aware for myself as in this is the next step for the bud over through the winter. Sorry, Fred. into the spring, and eventually it'll break into leaf. And 99% of the reason I do that is to be able to identify them. See, I actually have learned over the years to identify winter twigs, which is a very hard thing to do. So then when you see the transformation of when the little buds break into the opening leaves, they look completely different. But when the leaves come out in the trees, they look completely different again. And if anybody is actually into that kind of stuff,
Yes.
and you look at the twigs, and you'd love to know what kind of tree it is, look on the ground. The evidence will be on the ground. It's like decaying leaves. But if you really want to train yourself, study the bark, study the branches, study the shape of the tree, study the buds, and just become, are they alternate, are they opposite, are they alternate and opposite? There's many little different factors, and you actually become very focused on that.
If you're doing that, you're not then thinking about, the cost of petrol.
But even right now,
great.
Brad, while I was trying to explain that to you, we were picturing those very particular things.
You're right.
And it's
You're right,
then
we
you
were,
then you realise, going, wait, there's a protest going on, and it's like it does. You gotta sometimes empty the mind. Your recycle bin, your brain has a recycle bin, I believe. You got to throw a lot of stuff in and start putting some new stuff in, and try and have a lot of good stuff in there that you don't want to put into the recycle bin, and because you will not avoid the chaos, so there's no harm in inviting in the happiness.
Very good. And when you bring groups out into to the woods, out into nature, do you explain the kind of things you were talking about there? Now, the intricacies of nature,
everything, and we even look at the roots of the trees, and sometimes why are the roots more protruding on one side than not on the other side? And you can see a sequence of trees down along a line, and they're all on the same side, and it's basically strengthening against the prevailing winds. And it's just to notice all of these little things, and little spruce cones that you'd find in the ground, they'd be nibbled up, and it's like you do not see the animals, but you can see the tracks, you can see what they leave behind, and the food that they eat. And in on little spruce cones, people think is just decaying, when it could be a squirrel. So what it's telling you is, these are the kind of animals that are here. We might not see them, but now we know they're there.
Do you get people who would go out with you grudgingly and then discover the wonder that's out there? Do you find people that are...
I personally believe that curiosity is a lot of it, and I tell people always at the start, we might cover many topics. I'm trying to get through as many topics in one day, and it's little snippets of everything. And I'm doing my best to get all of these things done. And maybe if I done 10 topics, maybe 9 of them might not be to their fancy, but there could be that one little thing. We'll say, for example, it could be foraging, or it could be navigation. One of those ticks the box from feels good. Now they can go on to the next step there and do a fuller course or something on that to make it a little bit more aware of it.
The younger people that go out with you, are they easier to bring along, if you know what I mean, Tom?
They're a bit crazier. Yeah. And I did a strange thing happened lately. I was lucky enough to be invited to Nina College. It used to be the vocational school, Nina College, and to have it was biodiversity week, and I was in there, and we're bringing out a few classes, but to have a little garden outside and to have trees planted, but what I noticed was, while we're standing there, is everybody is focused on these little trees, and we talk about the tree, but I said, let's look to the ground. What's on the ground, and the plants that were on the ground, and it was lovely little plants like dandelion, nettle, plantain, and loads of yarrow, which is a magnificent plant. But in amongst all of that chaos was the skeleton of a fox.
Go on.
And this is true. Wow. And I didn't take any of it. Usually I do. And there was the skeleton of a fox. I thought, we're all so caught up on a quick look at the height, but look what's down below. And it's to teach your senses and your awareness and your focus on on the little bit of every single thing that you notice. Everything. And be curious about everything. If you see a plant, it's not just a plant. Let's be curious about it. What plant is that? Is it edible? Is it poisonous? What is it good for? And just open up all those senses. And even right now, I'd love to say to you, what protest? You know, but it's even though it's unavoidable.
Because we are diverted now. We're talking about this.
We're diverted. We're gone down a little Boreen.
Yeah.
We're gone down a Boreen.
But that's why we were so delighted to have you on today, because we knew it was going to be a kind of a heavy morning, and to talk about this is just wonderful.
Yeah.
You know,
I sort of half came in with my brain loaded with anger and frustration about what's going on. It's like, okay, I'm going to say this, I'm going to say that. But then when you get caught up on the outdoors and the natural world, as I say, it's a completely different
But there
focus.
you go. Do you get angry about what's going on?
Ferocious.
Do you?
I get very ferociously angry, yeah. Realistically, just...
What, about where we're going and what
where we're
doing?
going and how we're being treated. It's like, but it's constant. That's my problem. And I look at people who are meant to represent the Irish citizens, and when they take their pledge and they get voted in, it's to represent the country and the people of the country. And I don't see that, unfortunately. But one thing about, and I won't go deep into politics or we'll be here for a long time and there might be no legs left in the furniture, but one thing that does get to me about politicians, the people who make decisions for the country, we have to base our whole lives, our existence, our children, their grandchildren, on their opinion. That's what frightens me most of all. What if they're wrong? That's what should be questioned the whole time, you know.
And they can be, God knows.
But they should be questioned. They need to ask themselves the question, is it a crazy idea? But it's like, no, it's not. And it's like, once it's passed, it cannot. And the people... Just let's say the individual who came up with that opinion eventually retires, walks away, but we're left with that opinion.
It's very interesting indeed. If people want to make contact with you about the various excursions you have into nature, how
I have a
can they
couple
do
of
that?
magnificent excursions coming up, lucky enough. And as usual, it's Woven World Bushcraft, .ie. But on the 25th of April, there's an adult bushcraft course. It's a day out in the woods to discover all the little bits, as I say. And I'm sure there'll be something in it along the way or there may be many things. The next one then, and people have been asking me about this one, is on the 26th of April. I believe it's a Sunday. And a nice little stroll into the camp, down through the woods, things like that, is for an adult and child day, like our guardian and child, or and little projects they can do together, just spending time in nature. And they'll have all their own little individual tasks.
Very good.
So it's about bonding as well, if one gets one's drift.
Right. So the website again is?
Woven World Bushcraft. .ie. Woven as in when you weave everything together, it's a woven world.
It's great to see you as always, Tom. Thanks for
Tipp FM's Tip Today.
With Slattery's Garage, Puck On. Main Peugeot dealers in the Premier County. And now stocking the full range of the luxury French car brand DS Automobiles. Book your test drive today with Slattery's Garage, Puck On. See slatterysgarage.ie. Tip Today, in association with Slattery's of Pecan, your main Peugeot dealer for over 50 years in the Premier County. slatterysgarage.ie.
Thanks, Pat, and welcome back to the final hour of Tip Today. Jane was on to us from Nina. She said, sorry, Joe, this is making reference to my chat with Joe Leahy earlier on. Sorry, Joe, but when our government reps refused to talk to the people they were elected to represent, then they created the problem. The reason we have no fuel in the pumps and exams are cancelled is because of the government's refusal to talk to the people. But once Joe and the government blames the Irish people, they will blame anybody but themselves for the state the country is in. Shame on you all for bringing this great little country of ours to its knees. We've had enough, says Jane on 083 311 3311. Somebody else saying that lad, that would be Tom Bawn, on now talking about mindfulness is spot on. That's what I do when something is annoying me. I go into my little garden, I deadhead my flowers, and it works for a while anyway. Says our Joe Noble to us today. And as I say, that's into us on 083 311 3311. And now the Gardaí have said they were left with no choice but to take on the fuel protesters who were continuing to hold the country to ransom. The Garda Commissioner, Justin Kelly, said his officers had been put in the invidious position of having to deploy public order units to ensure that hospitals can function, fires can be responded to, and that people can be brought to hospital. Commissioner Kelly said because of the illegal actions of a few, the blockades, as he referred to the protests, were endangering our state. Now, GRA rep for Tipperary, Richie Kennedy, joins me now. Good morning to you, Richie.
Morning, Fran.
Thanks very much indeed for coming on with us today. I posed the question a couple of times this morning, Richie, and I'd love your view on it. Do you think the public's relationship with the Gardaí has been damaged by what's been going on over the last few days?
Look, it probably will be deteriorated some bit, Fran. Like any situation, our members didn't want to be there. It was, as the Commissioner said, we were put in a position where something had to be done, and look, I know from talking to the lads on the ground, they have massive sympathy for the people protesting, the haulers, the farmers, and it's unfortunate I got to a situation where the protesters had to be removed, and look, it's never going to be good optics for anyone in that kind of a situation. It does no one any favours.
Were Tipperary Gardaí deployed to the protest?
Yes, there was members who arrived into work on some of the mornings during the weekend. They were due to work locally, and they were deployed down to Cork, and people brought in overtime to fill the gaps then after that.
Yeah, and just for to inform the listeners this morning, how does it work, Richie? I mean, you get a directive from your sergeant or your inspector, I guess, or your superintendent. Is that how it works? And you go where you're sent then?
That's it, essentially, Fran. People were contacted late Friday night, told where they were going the following morning. People who were due to be not working the following day, that should have been off this weekend, were directed into work. And members arrived in thinking they were starting to maybe do a shift in Clonmel or a shift in Thurles, and were told there's buses coming at some point in the morning, and you're all going to Cork. And that's essentially the way it works. You're told where you go, and that's it. You're just a resource, and you're sent and you're deployed where you're needed.
Right, and you can't. I mean, even if you feel strongly, maybe on behalf of protesters or whatever, you still have to go. Is that it? I mean, you can't say, "Hold on, I disagree with that in some way."
You could be subject to discipline, Fran, if you didn't go where you're told to go. You'd be leaving yourself open to disciplinary procedures then from Garda management if you didn't follow the direction to police protests. And look, like, there's plenty of guards around the country. There are farmers' sons and daughters around the country. Many come from lots of them from working class backgrounds that would have family protesting. But it's an unfortunate situation. Members have been put in that they had to go and police these protests. And look, the majority of it went off very well over the past few days, and you'd see it was policed very well. But unfortunately, when it came to having to remove protesters, there's going to be some kind of force used, which is unfortunate.
Why is it that some of the blockades or the protests required the use of pepper spray, for example, and others didn't? Was it simply that diplomacy was better in some places than others, Richie, or how do you view that?
Every situation is different. Some things work easier in some places, some don't in other places, and it depends on what you're met with coming the other way. And look, pepper spray was applied in some places, but pepper spray will be seen as one of the lesser force options in Garda Síochána. Like, there's no lasting effects from it. It only lasts a short amount of time, and that's why pepper spray will be used rather than, let's say, a bat and strike or something along those lines, which will cause someone some form of injury. But pepper spray is only a short term measure.
I'd love your view on the army and the role the army had to play in this. And now there appears to be some sort of a rift between defence and justice. Helen McEntee, I understand, rebuking Jim O'Callaghan for the send in the army statement at this point. How would Gardaí feel about that?
In these situations, the use of the army, they have equipment that we don't have, and they're trained in aspects like they have, like the vehicles for removing tractors and trucks, stuff that we in Garda Economy don't have. Anytime we need services like that, we generally have the use of private contractors for it, which in this situation we wouldn't have. And look, we've a long history of working with the Defence Forces over the years. Back when we used to have to do like cash escorts and stuff, we worked hand in hand with the army at that time, and there's a good relationship there between both sides. So look, if the need to be used, needs to be used, and that was a decision that was made a lot higher up the rank structure than the lads on the ground. Lads on the ground just go along with what's needed to be done. Like.
Was there not a certain irony as well, Richie, about, the people who were protesting, genuinely protesting, were out there protesting because they're finding it very hard to make ends meet, with the cost of living, the cost of fuel particularly, all of those kind of things. But here you had the Guards and the Army who have their own difficulties with the government because of similar issues.
And there is, like, we're currently in long-term dispute with government over unkept promises in relation to pay and conditions, and the army as well. And look, and it is, and like our members, and this has been a continuous narrative from the lads and ladies over the last few days, where they didn't want to be there. They didn't want to be breaking up the protests, but they were put in a fortunate position where they had to. And like my members, I get it every day. The cost, we feel the pinch as well when it comes to the cost of fuel. We have members commuting huge distances every day of the week, and the cost of filling the car with diesel has got out of hands. And look, we'd love to see a solution that people got a good discount on their fuel, or some measures carried out by government, because it would help us as well. And look, the majority of the protesters were decent people. Look, there's like every protester going to get an element that are going to hijack it for their own reasons. But the majority of the protesters, and a lot of it was good natured between both sides, and it went relatively okay for the majority of it.
Where do you see things now? I mean, are you still on alert? Because, I mean, we're hearing this morning, looking at the screen in front of me here, and some people making the point this is not over yet. Is the Gardaí still on alert, Richie?
Yes, we are. It's still what it's called in our job is the Commissioner designates us. It's designated an exceptional event. That's where we're currently at, an exceptional event status at the moment. So that's going to continue at least for another 24 hours or so.
And what exactly does that mean?
It just means that basically no one gets a day off. Essentially, to put it in simple terms, it's all hands to the pump for the duration of the event. We run similar things for the likes of Patrick's Day, concerts and stuff. They're similar type situations, but this one, because it was more sudden, you don't have the luxury of planning ahead. They declare these events just to get extra bodies in with, and it takes away people's rights to days off and stuff, that kind of thing. For the duration of the event, people just don't get that luxury.
One of the critiques that I read, and I think I might be speaking for quite a lot of people, is that we find it hard to see the Gardaí on the streets, find it hard to see them on the beat. We all know that resources are tight, but something like this, all of a sudden, there's hundreds of Gardaí available, and as some people might view it, to police their own citizens on a protest. What do you say to that? Can you understand that frustration that's there?
Look, we're as frustrated as anyone about the lack of manpower on a day-to-day basis, and I suppose why people see more during this event, as I said, everyone's days off were cancelled, so you're basically doubling the capacity of the force in one go. So at one time, you generally half the force are on their days off, and then they rotate in, and other people take their days off. So, but in this situation, everyone is in at the same time, so it makes it look appearances that we have. There's loads of guards available where they normally, but there are people who are taking their days off after they're working their week of shifts. So it's just appearances that there is extra there on these days, but essentially it's a temporary measure that is unsustainable, really, in a longer term because people have to have days off. And look, we'd love to have that many guards all the time. It'd make our lives so much easier if we had that level of manpower, but unfortunately we don't.
But I guess some of that time will have to be made up for in some way. And will that mean that there will be even less Gardaí from time to time then on our streets?
No, in this situation, you just lose the days and that's it. You don't get them back. So it's just one of those things. You don't get the days back down the line. You don't get say, "Oh, you're off now next week because you worked those days." No, they're just lost.
All right, okay. And the GRA, will you discuss this among yourselves? Will you give a response to the commissioner and maybe to the department about this?
We've been in ongoing discussions all weekend, kind of trying to get more information for our members because look, I'll be straight out about it. It's been badly organised and fed through to the members. A lot of it is left up kind of locally to local inspectors and superintendents to contact people. It was really done on an ad hoc basis. I know it was a situation where it was going to be, because it was so sudden and the measures were taken so fast, the time to organise wasn't there. But we've been called on to do it in a time where we're probably not getting the support from government ourselves and from our own senior leadership team that probably the members deserve. But when it came to then, it is a one-way street where we expected at the drop of a hat to go and police this event, and in fairness to our own members, they did. But it's been a busy few days for us as reps because it's been basically phone calls and text messages and stuff around the clock. People looking to see what where they're entitled to in terms of getting to these places, how they're getting home, food. A lot of it was left very late in the day. In some situations where members weren't getting what they're entitled in terms of meal breaks and stuff down there. But look, it'll be something that like all events, there'll be a review afterwards, there'll be feedback given, and hopefully lessons learned. But we'll wait and see.
That's very interesting. Is there not an overall plan that is ready and waiting for a crisis? Is there not something that kicks in, Richie?
I suppose in this situation, this one was it's kind of a bit out of the ordinary in a way because there were so many sites. Usually in a big event, it's localised, whatever it is. Like we'd have plans for major events in terms of, if let's say we did a US president visit, which we've policed them lots of times where they've been huge events and huge security operations, and but you have time to plan it, and it's all generally in one area, one route, and you can plan accordingly. But in this situation, when you sites Dublin, Cork, Galway, all over the place, it's very hard to coordinate something on that scale in that amount of time.
Richie, we appreciate your time this morning. Thanks very much for coming on with me. Thank you. Good morning.
No bother.
Good morning to you. That's Richie Kennedy, Garda Richie Kennedy there, of the GRA rep indeed for Tipperary. 1800 938 007. Text and WhatsApp 083 311 3311. Hi Fran, it says, I have to say I can't trust this government anymore. We got a rise a week ago for the pension, and it was taken off us a month before due to the €10 payment on blister pack medication. We depend on blister packs as people with arthritis, dementia and an awful lot more, says one of our listeners to us today. Lots coming into us. We'll take a break, back in just a moment.
Tipp FM's Tip Today.
With Slattery's Garage, Puckon, main Peugeot dealers in the Premier County. And now stocking the full range of the luxury French car brand DS Automobiles. Book your test drive today with Slattery's Garage, Puckon. See slatterysgarage.ie. Tip Today, in association with Slattery's of Puckon, your main Peugeot dealer for over 50 years in the Premier County. slatterysgarage.ie.
Francis was in touch with us and joins me now. Francis, good morning to you.
Good morning.
And good to talk to you. You think that we might be blaming the wrong people here, do you, Francis?
Well, I can't get over it. Even the Independent yesterday done a survey.
Yeah.
And only 28% of the people blame the war. But the war is one person. Donald J. Trump is the man who started the war. He decided that Iran were enriching uranium, and he was nervous that they might develop a bomb, an atomic bomb, and that they might use it. And that's funny because the Americans are the only people who have ever used an atomic bomb, and they seem to have forgotten about that. But he has started this war, and his war has led to the Iranians closing the Strait of Hormuz. And this has affected the supply of oil, and this has affected the cost of oil. It's a very simple thing. But Trump is the total problem here. If he hadn't started that war, we'd be paying the same price for our oil as we were paying 2 months ago. And nobody seems to realise that I would have interfered with fellas selling chips above in Dublin. Mr. Trump has a thriving business in Doonbeg. In 24, it made 2.23 million. There's a waiting list at 25,000 ahead from Americans to join the club. And this week it was booming, and it made thousands and thousands of pounds, and not one tractor, one lorry, one car protester was in front of Doonbeg to interfere with his business. And to make matters worse, this man who is a mass murderer, I mean, he is responsible for the deaths of up to 90,000 people in Gaza and a few thousand in Iran on his merry way. And he taught the people of Iran.
What do you mean by his support of Israel? Is that what you mean?
Sorry?
By his support, his support to Israel. Is that what you mean?
His support. Sure. It's all their munitions are being used there.
Right. But can I just put it to you that what people were protesting, I think it was a build-up of things that before the Iranian war, I think, the cost of living in this country had gone through the roof.
That was there, and that was... but the thing is, this package that we're getting now, these people are still going to pay thousands and thousands more because of Mr. Trump.
Yeah.
And why are they not protesting in front of his place? And surely to God, I think it's a disgrace that a man, as far as I'm concerned, is a mass murderer or associated with mass murder, that we would give him one of our main sporting events and that the Taoiseach would promise to go down and join him there. If the Keenahans were running that, we'd close it down because we'd consider them gangsters and murderers.
Right, but whatever you might think of him, he is the democratically elected president of the United States, and it's more. Is it not more about honouring the office as opposed to the man, if you know what I mean, Francis?
Well, it has been, but sure, it's not the office that's running Doonbeg. It's the man who's running Doonbeg, and it's the man who's making the money out of Doonbeg. That's not going to the American economy. That's going to Mr. Donald J. Trump.
The only thing I'd say to you is that we don't have a great deal of influence over what's happening geopolitically, but we do have influence over what we do and how we react to events in our own country. Yeah. And most people would agree, the majority of Irish people in that Sunday Indo poll would agree that we dealt with it very badly from a government point of view.
Really, the government were so slow, so ponderous. They were incredible that it took them so long to come to the realisation that they couldn't just say, "Oh, we'll talk to these few appointed people, and the rest of you go away." I mean, it was a terrible blunder of political management.
And why do you think that was the case? Because a lot of our listeners would believe, Francis, that the government is in a bit of a bubble and they're not always aware about what's really going on in rural areas, particularly, and the reality.
I have to agree with you now. They definitely don't seem to be. I mean, I would expect that when this Irish Open takes place, that there will be thousands of people with Palestinian flags marching around Doonbeg and turn the roads of Doonbeg into the streets of Doonbeg and And now Trump, not alone was he blaming Iran, they were stopping the aisle going through. Now he discovered that they were letting ships through and they were getting money off of the people who were going through. So now he has decided he's stopping the Strait of Hormuz.
He's having his
and
own
he's
blockade.
Not going to let anybody through. So that has sent the price of oil up overnight.
Yes. Yeah.
I can't understand that there's not one lorry pulled up down there in front of his place to make a protest.
Right, but the only thing I'd say to you about that, I mean, Doon Beg is delighted to have him down there because, I mean, look at what he's done for a local economy in a very rural place.
Money and that,
and he's employing. There's a lot of people employed down there that need that in rural Clare. So
I think just because you're employed to be a mass murderer doesn't make it any better to me. I consider he should be charged with war crimes himself and Netanyahu, but that's my opinion. Other people would consider he was a hero.
Francis, can I ask you about the protest now? I mean, have we changed here in this country? Are we getting more like the French now, do you think, that we'll end up out on the streets now?
That was the first time I ever seen anything approaching the French approach. They've been very, very energetic, or whatever word you might like to use, in any protest. They really lash out and go like that. But I don't know, I really don't know what, because a lot of the protest, it's brought great publicity and all that, but the long-term outcome of it, I don't see this small amount of money. I would say that any contractor who is cutting silage or that he's still going to be paying thousands of pounds more this year than he paid last year.
Yeah,
if Trump continues to block the Strait of Hormuz, sure, it's going to escalate the price.
And what about the other thing that's really bothering people, and it emerged throughout the protests as well, there's a huge amount of waste in this country. I mean, billions of euro wasted.
Billions. Sure, this I'm not up with all the stories on it, but some of this money that was set aside for different things, these greenways and things like that, there's been a huge waste of government money, and
cycleways and greenways and stuff, and some of them not used properly either. Yeah.
Yes, not even properly. I don't think if they have the right to even develop some of them, it's all kind of up in, and the bicycle sheds and all these kind of things are all, people are struggling, but the home heat in Ireland, which affects an awful lot of elderly people, and I'm elderly myself, but it affects an awful lot of elderly people, and that has not been, there hasn't been anything done for that. I know they'll say that we're heading into summer, and people, if it was November, they'd had to look at it.
Well, what they're saying about that, Francis, is there's a European directive there, and we don't have jurisdiction over it.
Yes, that doesn't allow them that they can't reduce it beyond a certain amount of money. But that's like Poland opened power stations burning coal there a few years ago, and they're in Europe too. And we're not allowed to put coal in the fire.
It's interesting. Are you disappointed with the way the country has gone or is going, or are you disappointed with that, Francis?
I suppose I'd have to say I'm a bit disappointed with government, and I'm a bit disappointed with Fianna Fáil, because my family, we would have been long-time supporters of Fianna Fáil, and the present leader of Fianna Fáil doesn't really do a whole lot for me, and I think he's focused now on Europe, and maybe that's what's wrong, that he didn't realise he had a problem at home, that he was looking ahead down the road when he was going to be marching around in that position. But somebody dropped the reins very badly, that it took so long to get in and talk to people. I mean, to get dialogue going, and then they started that they were only going to talk to certain representatives of certain groups, and that irritated a lot of the protesters who weren't part of these kind of organised groups. And
can I ask you, Francis, and you can tell me to mind my own business if you want, but would your background have been in agriculture, or what was your background in?
No, I'd have a mixed bag of things.
Would you?
I was in a lot of things up and down in my life, so it'd be hard to pin me down to one spot. Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Francis.
Yeah, well, I would have come from an agricultural background. I could come from a farming background, and that would be my roots are in agriculture, and my family are in agriculture.
All right, interesting. Francis, a pleasure, and thank you so much for coming on with us today. That's Francis, and he's viewed there. He thinks that we might be blaming the wrong people, and thinking that Donald Trump is the man to blame. And in fairness to him, he has a very good point there. I'm sure you'll agree. 083 311 3311. Now, a gentleman who has contributed to the show a lot over the years is activist Thomas Ryan. Good morning to you, Thomas.
Good morning, friend. How are you keeping?
I'm very well indeed. I want to talk to you about the state of the roads in Care, because you've recently, I think, moved. How long are you in Care now, Thomas?
I'm here since December of 2025.
All right, very good. So we'll talk about that in a moment. But could I get your view on the protests, first of all, Thomas?
You can, friend. First of all, I just want to commend yourselves for the absolutely fantastic coverage that you're giving this topic. And you're giving both sides the views of what people need and what people are talking about. And all that, so well done to yourself, Leanne, and all the team there. In regards to the view of the protests and all that, I'm all for it, and I'm with the protesters that are out on the thing. What the government have done is a shambles. They've let it run to the very end, and then to offer 10 cents a litre for petrol and diesel, and then 2.4 on marked gas, it's a joke.
And what are you saying? I mean, the people that you're talking to, Thomas, I spoke to Margaret last week, and she genuinely told me, as she was talking to me, she was sitting in the cold because she couldn't afford to...
Brian, I was listening to that interview with Margaret last week, and I bawled my eyes out listening to her.
Yeah.
It touched so much that it's happening all over the country. It's not just Margaret. There's a lot of people like that, and my heart goes out to people like that. It's either eat or heat. And you know yourself, we can't have our senior citizens who worked for this country, who bled tooth and nail to pay their taxes and to have to sit in the cold during these unpredictable weathers, and to say heat or eat, it's not fair.
And did some of those stories get lost in the protest, if you know what I mean? Now, I know that the protesters had very genuine concerns about keeping their businesses going and the businesses open and that. But did we lose some of the smaller stories?
Friend, we lost some of the small stories, yes, it's true. But this protest is not just about the fuel and all that. It's about the cost of living, in my view. And fair dues to everyone who's standing up for it. The government have crippled this country, and it's time for me, Hon Martin, now to go to the Áras and dissolve the government and look for an election.
But you know that's not going to happen.
No, it's not going to happen. And we know, we know Sinn Féin are bringing the motion of no confidence to the door tomorrow. We know the government will pass. But you have the likes of Michael Murphy, Ryan O'Mara, and Michael Lowry, who's the kingmaker of this government, and who really triumphant Louis own Trump and saying that he'd done so much. There are people who can bring down this government. Why not? The reason being is they're getting their cushy money and all that, and they're expensive, and they're enjoying being in government, but yet they're making people's lives miserable.
Right, but they I presume they would believe that they are the right people to have the reins at what is a very difficult time and a very chaotic time from a geopolitical point of view. They would believe that they are the people who can bring us through this.
Fran, I don't think they are. In all fairness, I don't think they are. It's time for them to bow out and give over. If you look at it, we have Fine Gael have been in government since 2011. That is 15 years, backed by Fianna Fáil since 2016. And I know now Fianna Fáil supporters will turn around and say, "Oh, we weren't in government." You're in confidence supply, which means that you back the government on everything. And with that, they're in government and in and then Grand Coalition from 2020. They're not the right people to bring us into government. or to lead this government, he needs to go, or a change of leadership is needed.
Right.
With Micheál Martin, and maybe put someone else.
And that's your opinion on that. Talk to me about the roads. There's a particular area that you're concerned about in Care. Where is that, Tom?
Yes, Ryan. Where I'm just living now in the new estate called Meadowview in Care, there is a turn-off coming into my estate at Dunishka, which is just behind we'll say, Butler's Court, as you're coming in from Clonmel.
Yes.
There's serious potholes. I sent on photos there to Leanne, you've probably seen them.
Yeah,
and there's serious potholes on it. I'd say cars are avoiding it left, right and centre to not go there. They're so deep. Now, I've contacted numerous councillors and been told, it's private state, they won't do anything about it in regards to that. But who looks after the roads? Like, this is urgent. I sent an email to the county council as well to ask them to come out and fill it, and no response. Someone's tyres are going to get blown out very, very soon.
And is that a private estate there?
It's a private. Well, the way I look at it is no estate is private. All roads.
There's an element of social housing to every estate, I guess. Yeah.
An element of social housing, but all roads belong to government. That's what people pay their car taxes for and all that. In regard to the roads should be looked after, no matter what estate or public road, they should be all looked after by council or whoever in regard the public bodies of estates.
Right. And you said you were in touch with some people on this, but just repeat that to me again. They're telling you what? That it's not there?
They're telling me, because of roads being in private estates and all that it's not council's problem. That it's going to be resurfaced very soon. But when is that, friend? It's been like that now since I moved out here in December, and it's getting worse.
Right, but did they indicate that they have plans to do something there, Thomas? Is it?
They have plans to resurface the whole area, but in regards to resurfacing, that could take ages. No one knows what way things are going to go, especially with money now going to be made tight, and we know there's going to be cutbacks because of all the money that the government are spending. Well, I won't say spending, I'd say squandering. But in regards to that, what are they going to do? If they come out and put in a bit of tarmac to fill it up, it would suffice, and it would help so many people in the area to avoid the potholes and to look after the cars.
All right, so you're calling on them to do that now, Thomas. Yeah.
Yes, I am calling on the county council to get their off their backsides in their lovely ivory tower in Nina and in Clonmel, and to come out and fill the potholes. There's two big mass potholes, to fill them up and say, lads, look, it's done. And we'll be in there soon to do the roads and all that as well.
All right, Thomas, good to talk to you today, and thank you for your time. Thank you. Good morning to you. It's Thomas Ryan speaking to us from his new home, indeed, the town of Care. 1800 938 007. We will take a break.
Tipp FM's Tip Today.
With Slattery's Garage, Puck On. Main Peugeot dealers in the Premier County. And now stocking the full range of the luxury French car brand DS Automobiles. Book your test drive today with Slattery's Garage, Puck On. See slatterysgarage.ie. Tip Today, in association with Slattery's of Puckon, your main Peugeot dealer for over 50 years in the Premier County. slatterysgarage.ie.
Now, Sinn Féin has announced it will be tabling a motion of no confidence in the government. The party's leader, Mary Lou McDonald, says the actions of Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and independents have been disastrous, and claims they've lost confidence of the public. The Cathaoirleach of North Tipperary Sinn Féin, Dan Harty, joins me now. Good morning to you, Dan.
Good morning, Fran. A very good morning to your listeners.
And good to talk to you today. So you will be tabling that. There will be a counter motion, I guess. And with the way the numbers are, you don't really have a hope of succeeding.
Yes, well, we will be tabling a motion of no confidence this week, I suppose, Fran. If you look at the last week and the unprecedented protests around the country, I suppose you look at it and think, where did this come from? Is it a surprise? I suppose it is a surprise when you see a protest like that, because I've never seen anything like it before. But in the context of what's happened over the last couple of years, it's not surprising. There's a huge pinch on cost of living in this country at the moment in terms of house prices. If you look at road tax, road insurance, you have business rates, and the property tax were increased by council over the last couple of years as well. The pinch is happening everywhere. You know, even during the last government there, the government withdrew the energy credits. Since then, they promised to increase renters' credits, and they didn't. They promised €200 childcare, and they didn't. Student fees have actually increased, even when there was talks of those being abolished. And last year, I suppose, there was the biggest tax package that was ever introduced in the history of the state, and nearly all of that went to big business and developers, and nearly almost.
Well, no, some of what you read out there now was to be done over the course of the government, over the term of this government, Dan.
Yeah, well, look, people are looking for results, Fran, and they haven't seen it. And I suppose what you see with the pinch on fuel at the moment, with Trump and Netanyahu's war in Iran, this was just the straw that broke the camel's back, is the point I suppose I'm trying to make. When you see people turning out in those numbers, small business people, small farmers, contractors, turning out in those numbers on pickets on the motorways over the last week, those people would not be there unless their backs are to the wall and they're at their wits' end. So look, something needs to happen. The price of fuel in Ireland was already too high, and I suppose the spike from the Iran war just drove people over the edge, and people are demanding action on it. And I suppose you've seen from the government over the weekend with the package that they announced, that was an admittance that the first package that they announced was pittance and just wasn't enough, and was an insult to people. Even the package that was announced this week.
And do you think the new package, Dan,
people aren't happy with it?
Do you think the new package, Dan, was as a result of the protest, or do you think, as the government is telling us, that they were going to do something anyway?
No, absolutely, it was a result of the protest. There will be no package this weekend only for that protest. The government were pushed to it. The government, Pierce Harty introduced legislation before the Easter break to push for further increases in fuel and the cost of living, and warned the government that if they go away on the Easter holidays here without major intervention, there's going to be an issue. And he was proven right in that. There absolutely would have been no rush to bring in a cost of living package and tackle the cost of fuel only for that protest. And I suppose
so Sinn Féin then, Dan, is supporting the protesters. Are you supporting the blockades then as well at the oil refinery and at the fuel depots?
Well, look, Fran, if you look at protest over the last week, I think the government failed absolutely in the handling of this protest. It was absolutely mishandled. There was, this was coming. There was probably meetings held around the country. The protest movement had contacted the government, looking for dialogue, looking for a negotiation, looking for contact. That was not forthcoming by the government. That was a huge mistake. And as the week went on, the protest kind of escalated. I suppose people on the protest didn't even want to be there by the end of it. It's a long 6 days. They wanted to be back to work. They wanted to be back home with their families.
Right, but would you answer the question for me, Dan? Do you support the blockades at the oil refinery?
I support the escalation of the protest to get results, Fran, absolutely. And Sinn Féin are out on these protests across the country, and that was clear for everyone to see.
So you do support what happened at the oil depots then, and at the refinery in Whitegate, do you?
No, absolutely. That's what I'm saying. It was absolutely mishandled. I know you're talking to a GRA member there, and members of the Defence Forces were threatened on people as well. I know a lot of the rank and file of those organisations did not want to be sent out to face protesters, and they made their voices known to their management as well. So, it was.
But I mean, if the government, the country would have ground to a complete and absolute halt if the fuel was not released from those depots. Do you go along with that? Do you accept that as the fallout from this protest?
Oh no, I accept that would have been the case, Fran, but you have to look back on it now in hindsight that wasn't the case. In terms of making a point in a protest, sometimes you have to push to the limit to get a result. And in the end of the day,
right. But if the Gardaí didn't go in there still would be a protest at those depots.
Yeah, no, I accept that as well. But look, these are how these things. These are organic protests. One protest, the protests in Dublin weren't linked to the protests in Galway and the protests in Cork, and that's just the reality of it. There's an organic protest movement. It just shows the swell on the ground, as the people said, they wouldn't be there. They can't go home because they can't afford to go home. If they go home, they're going home to rack and ruin. There's a farmer there. He has machines out on finance. He has mortgage repayments to pay. He was saying he had 2 days fuel left in a tank at home. And he just couldn't go home because he's going home to rack and ruin.
One of the big issues with fuel has to be carbon tax. And Sinn Féin voted for carbon tax. You supported carbon tax.
No, that's absolutely incorrect, Frank. Sinn Féin are totally against carbon tax from day one. Carbon tax was introduced in 2010 by Fianna Fáil and the Green Party, and Sinn Féin have been against the carbon tax ever since, and have introduced legislation to have carbon tax removed over the last couple of years. And it's in Sinn Féin's pre-budget submissions on how you would remove carbon tax and how that would be paid for. And I know, there's people ask how would the retrofitting schemes and all that be paid for, and that is included and budgeted for in the Sinn Féin pre-budget submissions.
Well, because we're told the carbon tax is absolutely vital in terms of retrofitting and the like and all of that. But you're saying that you have a way to finance it other than that. Is that it?
Yeah, well, this is it. You see, the way the government's finance budgetary measures are done is that the retrofitting schemes are linked to the carbon tax, but obviously you can pay for it through other means, and we'll be looking at reducing the carbon tax. The government are looking at putting the carbon tax up every year by 750 per tonne until 2030, and that's going to be an astronomical figure. That's fairy tale stuff, Fran, and it's just not viable in the current scheme of things. And the carbon tax certainly needs to be removed, and all increases need to be suspended, and the recent increases need to be taken off the table.
So do you think that what happened last week was a seismic change for this country? Do you think?
It absolutely was, Fran. There's a seismic change in public opinion out there. Since the last general election, you can feel it on the ground. I suppose the recent polling indicates that as well. People have had enough. They're to the pin of their collar. They can't take any more. The cost of living crisis is just really pinching now at the moment. People will vote with their pockets, and their opinion will come out of their pockets. If they can't afford their daily life and to run their businesses, they're having a serious look at what's going on at the moment, and they're drilling down into the figures, and things aren't adding up for them at home, so they need a change at the top.
Do you think that we're done with this protest now?
It's very hard to say, Fran. Things are sporadic. It seems to have cooled off, obviously, over the last couple of days. But even yesterday, it was huge numbers out in Clonmel and Nina and Roscrea, and these protests weren't advertised over a week with huge publicity or anything like that. These are sporadic protests that were on a last-minute whim. And the huge numbers that came out just shows the anger and the frustration that's out there from ordinary people. And it'd be naive to think that this is going to go away, I think, but nobody knows how it's going to play out over the next week or so.
Are you calling on the independents who are supporting the government to support the Sinn Féin motion?
Absolutely, we'll be moving in motion, no confidence this week. Obviously, Michael Lowry's regional independent group are coming into sharp focus nationally. In terms of the vote, you look at the motion, no confidence. You need a majority of 88 in the Dáil to pass a motion. The government have 95 TDs at the moment, and there's about 10 of those regional independents, so they do have the ability to sway things. Obviously, you've had like some Michael Healy-Rae and a few more come out to say that they will support the government, so it probably need the support of some Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil backbenchers as well. So, look, I'm calling on the general public who have lost confidence in the government, and there is many of them, to lobby your local TDs to support the Sinn Féin motion of no confidence. And look, I think people have demanded that this motion of no confidence is heard this week, and it's good for the local TDs to mark their smarter cars on it anyway.
All right, Dan, good to talk to you. Gormilla Margaret, and thanks for coming on with us today. It's Dan Harty there, who's Cathaoirleach of North Tipperary, Sinn Féin. Leanne is with me. Morning, Leanne.
Good morning, Fran. How are you?
Are you busy or what this morning?
Whew, taking a breath now for a minute.
It's like that, isn't it? Huge amount of reaction this morning, wasn't there?
Huge amount of reaction, huge amount of upset, anger, unsettlement. It's been one of those mornings.
Yeah, it certainly is. Now, we do have a finalist. In case I forget to do this, in our wonderful Larry O'Keefe competition, John Hennessy from Mullinahone is our finalist. So we're giving that away on Friday, aren't we?
On Friday. We'll have the draw for the voucher on Friday.
And it's a €250 voucher that we're giving away. And it's all because Larry O'Keefe is having their sale currently, and there's all sorts of great bargains to be picked up there. What are you hearing from people generally this morning, Leanne?
We're getting a lot in on a certain Facebook post that seems to have gone out, and it really kind of highlights the stark reality of why people are so angry. So I'll bring you just a bit of it. This has gone out on social media. Someone compiled it. So it's a receipt they've done for the government spending in recent years.
Yes.
So 336,000 on a bike shed. Over €1 million for a printer that didn't fit in the room. A security hut for the OPW, 1.4 million. The Arts Council IT, which was later scrapped, was 6 million.
Whoa.
Then the Department of Children HQ, and it's been empty 18 months, was 16 million. COVID ventilators that they question ever worked was 22 million.
Was it indeed? Wow.
Then look at the e-voting machines, which again were scrapped, 55 million. The RT emergency bailout was 56. Electric buses, this has been a huge one because there was no chargers.
Yeah, this really went under the radar. The electric buses, as I understand, they're in a warehouse somewhere, aren't they?
They're in a warehouse, there's no chargers. So they haven't been made use of yet, and that was 80 million. Then looking at the Children's Hospital overrun, we're looking at over €1 billion at the moment. So that's even leaving out the 275,000 we spoke about recently, the tender for the book on the Department of Justice's history.
Yes.
So we're looking at about 3 billion. So if you take that into context then, an average 3-bed family home in Ireland costs about 275,000 at the moment. So that spending alone would have built 10,900 houses. And then with recent figures, there's 20,000 children overdue hospital assessments, and there's over 950,000 people waiting for hospital appointments at the moment.
It's incredible. And, you know, when you make up the waste that you're talking about billions, and then the package that we saw over the weekend of, 500 million, it pales into insignificance by comparison to the waste.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why people are so angry. So that's why this Facebook post was put together, because a lot of people say, oh, you're complaining, and it'll come, wait, be patient. But when people are seeing this economic waste and they're thinking of all the things that could have been done with this money, it makes them really. If you read this and you see it in the headlines, you drive down to your local filling station and you see diesel is 225, 226, it makes you angry. So this is really, it keeps coming back to this post has had huge traction, because when you see the figures in front of you, you kind of start to understand. You have to understand.
You can understand the anger, I suppose, and the frustration as well. What's coming up tomorrow?
Oh, we're going to have a great chat tomorrow about Trump's comments on Pope Leo, which has caused a huge stir. And a lot of people are bringing it back to traditional times in the Vatican, going back the centuries, where the actual post of the Pope was moved to France because the King of France decided he wanted control. We're also going to keep on this fuel prices because it's not going away anytime soon, and so many people have huge, huge feelings about this. And we're actually going to chat to a man who served with the UN in the Middle East. His name is JJ, so he's going to come on with us and give us some insight and analysis on geopolitics at the moment.
Very good indeed. All right, Leanne, thanks very much indeed for that. Leanne produced, and Stephen's on the way with the Time Tunnel, and we will speak to you tomorrow. Do look after yourselves in the meantime, won't you? Bye-bye.
Tipp FM's Tip Today.
With Slattery's Garage, Puck On. Main Peugeot dealers in the Premier County. And now stocking the full range of the luxury French car brand DS Automobiles. Book your test drive today with Slattery's Garage, Puck On. See slatterysgarage.ie.